everyone. Welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, December 2nd, and we've got a great Techstrong TV show lined up for you. I'm Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief, DevOps.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard, CEO, founder of Techstrong Group, and I'm sitting in for Charlene O'Hanlon, who's out at Innotech in Oklahoma City this week, so I'm here for her. We've got a really good show lined up for you today. Let me jump in and tell you what we've got. First of all, we have an interview by me, right? I'm going to interview Raj Sundrasen. Raj is the Regional Vice President for WalkMe. WalkMe is a company that's really defined a whole new category of software in instructing people on how to use software. It's an interesting story. The founder actually founded the company after trying to teach his mother how to use some computer programs. They've, of course, gone public. They've really kind of just defined a category here. And they recently have a new book. Well, Raj has a new book around his, as they call it, DAP. And he's going to tell us all about it. After that, another interview I did with my friend Adi Gelvan. Adi is the co-founder and CEO of a new company called SpeedDB. Adi and his team really have tried to just improve on one of the most successful open source databases out there, which is RocksDB. For those of, well, a lot of our audience, you already know what RocksDB is. It's a great program, but it could be better. And Adi and team thinks they've built a better mousetrap with SpeedDB. So we'll hear what Adi has to say with that. Then after that, we are going to go to Mike Jones, the haunted hacker. We have part 3 of a recent episode with Mike. And in this episode, Kurt Sudzik, former FBI agent and whistleblower lawyer, is going to be interviewed by talking with Mike. And actually, Mike was out in Oklahoma City at our event as well. It's always a pleasure to have Mike in the Haunted Hacker podcast on here. After Mike, we're going to go to something old. Something old today is from Rob Richardson, Microsoft MVP and an author. And it's from Making Kubernetes. Well, the session is Making Kubernetes How We Build Things. And you're going to learn some open source tooling available around Kubernetes ecosystem. Hopefully make you more productive and optimize your joy. And by the way, that was from our cloud native days with Kubernetes just a few months ago. After that, we'll take a break and we'll head things over. Charlene has recorded our news headlines as well as some great interviews with Michael Hofecker, Director of Threat Intelligence at Threat Quotient, company I followed for a long time. And she also has PJ Keimer, CTO and co-founder of Illumio, also a company I followed for a long time, and some new stuff going on out of Illumio too around Zero Trust. Charlene also has Alex Bennett, Global Senior VP, Workplace and Employee Experience at NTT, and she'll wrap things up with a great webinar preview of all the great webinars we have for the rest of this week. After that, we're going to throw things over to Mitch at the Analyst Corner. And Mitchell's show for today features Stacy English, Fetter Lake Director of Market Intelligence, and they're going to share the results of a report showing the usage of modern communications and video tools like Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, and Zoom have accelerated at breakneck speed in recent years and shows no sign of slowing down. Yes, it does, and I agree with that. But I got to tell you that my own personal view is it still pales in comparison to in-person meetings. Well, that's maybe for another day. After Mitch's Analyst Corner, actually, Mitch has a second video as well. He has Kevin Knowlton, Director of Academic Outreach at DHS-funded CyberOrg, and discuss release of the first national K-12 cybersecurity learning standards. So some really good stuff there from Mitch. And that'll wrap things up for today. It's a nice Thursday, excellent show. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our first guest.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
All right, first up today is Raj Sundrasan. Raj is an accomplished author, regional vice president of WalkMe. As I said in the beginning of my show today, WalkMe is a tremendous story. They've defined the digital assistance program DAP market. Raj is going to tell you all about it. Here now's my interview with him.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm really happy to have Raj Sundrasan with us today. And hope, Raj, I didn't mangle that too bad. But Raj is with our friends at WalkMe. WalkMe is a company that I've been covering now for probably 2 or 3 years. I first became aware of WalkMe at a Insight Ignite conference, actually, in Iceland, of all places, with my friend Emmett Keefe. And WalkMe was one of the featured companies there, and I really loved the idea of being able to make applications more useful for your employees, customers, etc. Followed them all the way through. They recently had an IPO. I guess it was in the middle of COVID, wasn't it, Raj? Because it feels like it was just about a year ago or 8-9 months ago.
June 16th, we listed on the NASDAQ.
Yep. So not even 6 months ago, right? And a successful IPO. But more than, the IPO is a signal of, significant achievement. But more than the IPO itself, it's really, WalkMe's become sort of a category-defining solution, right? And Raj, not to put too much pressure on you, but I'm going to make you define that category for the audience. And then we're going to talk more along that about 2 recent major partnerships that WalkMe has announced that help define it as the category leader. So, Raj, welcome to Techstrong TV. We should also start with your background and your position at WalkMe.
So I've been in HR tech probably just shy of 20 years. I started off at ADP when they wanted to launch their HR outsourcing platform. Then moved across to SAP, where I managed their HR software business. And then around 2015, I started to get a little bit nervous around, the implications of the cloud. We successfully started to transition under Bill McDermott, and we were selling a lot of cloud software. But my biggest concern was that, we weren't focused on the outcomes and the value customers were should be realizing from those investments. And so I made a crazy decision to leave, and I went to try and do a digital transformation program of my own. And it didn't take me too long to realize how far out of my depth I was when I went across. But what I learned then was what was important to customers, right? And this was fundamentally different from what was important to the vendor. And as I went through that journey, I learned that customers were really looking for an extension to their team, looking to de-risk implementations. I was worried about whether my boss would lose his job, whether we'd have cost overruns, and how I'd have to go and explain this to the P&L owners who were more interested in manufacturing tires than digital transformations. And in that process, I came across WalkMe. And I flew to Tel Aviv in Israel and pitched my way in. And that was just over 5 years ago in November of 2016. And here I am today, 5 years later.
Good for you. What a great story. Good stuff. And, so you described the problem that WalkMe kind of helped solve. But, what are the Gartners and the analysts of the world? What do they tag that? What is that?
So Gartner has created a category called digital adoption solutions, right? And for them, it's really around trying to figure out how you can take friction out of the employee's experience as they go through their day-to-day work. And they're pretty bullish on things. I mean, they reckon that by 2025, 70% of companies around the world will use digital adoption solutions in some shape or form, right, to simplify the experience that their employees have. We have other analyst firms like the Everest Group who have done a peak matrix, and slowly but surely, I believe this is something that will catch on, and it's part of the book that I wrote, which got published a month ago.
And what is that book?
The book's called the Dap Strategy, and the core around it is how you leverage new ways of working to accelerate, or rather, how to leverage new ways of working to de-risk and accelerate your digital transformation program. Sorry?
I love it.
And part of the real challenge was what we were seeing was that there was so much software that was being purchased, right? I think Battery Ventures did a study, and by 2023 or 2024, they believe $1 trillion worth of new software is probably going to be procured globally. And then when you overlay that with services, right, you're going to add $2, $3, $4, $5 trillion more to help that software come alive. Yet, Gartner believes that less than 2 in 10 programs or transformations actually deliver on the value that they actually promised. So what WalkMe tries to do, and a digital adoption platform tries to do, it tries to de-risk that investment. And how we do it is we try and understand what those strategic corporate objectives are, and then try and understand what the financial and operational levers are, before then saying, okay, now I got to build some content on a particular application or a set of applications that help me get to those operational and financial levers. So it's evolved from this point solution where you just plonk it on an app and hope people can use things better, to now actually having a real strategic imperative where you're trying to figure out, you kind of know where true north is, and now you're going to build content to help you get to that true north, and then you're going to measure, iterate, and off you go. And that's kind of what we do.
Excellent. This book published last month that you mentioned, right? It's available like on the usual sites, Amazon and so forth, or?
Yeah, available on Amazon. You can buy it on Apple Books. Any way you need to.
The usual, wherever you buy books.
Wherever you buy books, and I have a site called the DapStrategist.com where it's all at. Proud to say that it's been delivered to over 30 countries 30 cities around the world, which is quite encouraging and quite exciting. And there's a movement, and it's an exciting time to be in technology.
Congratulations, man. That's a great story. Good stuff.
Thank you.
And congrats to you. All right. So let's turn now to some recent news out of WalkMe, if it's okay.
Sure.
Why don't you share with our audience?
I think, we just had an analyst call announcing our third quarter results, which are, we think were pretty strong. And we announced two very strategic partnerships. One with Deloitte in North America, where they're doubling down and building out a practice where digital adoption platforms, specifically WalkMe, will be central to their digital transformation offerings, because they've seen and understood this to be a real game changer for not just themselves because they're a customer, but also for other customers that we've partnered on. So we're really excited that, we're going to start seeing that category come to life in the form of a practice with real muscle behind it. And I think that's one of the announcements. The second announcement was, we're now part of SAP's Solex infrastructure, which effectively means we're a solution extension to the SAP product suite, specifically to their Concur expense management platform. And we will be rolling out content that will help customers through that journey. And if they wanted to extend it further, we'd be more than delighted to help them on that journey. So these two are real big game-changing relationships for us.
No doubt about it. I mean, look, that's not every company that goes public per se, but every tech company that's seeking to put have the platform, they always need, right, in order to achieve critical mass, you almost, unless it's a rare bird like Dell back in the day, right? Dell never had a channel. It was direct sales, but they were selling boxes. It's a very different model. When you're selling software services, software and, SaaS kind of software, whatever you want to call it, but traditional software too, you almost, by definition, to achieve scale, need that force multiplier.
Yeah, I don't
channel partners.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really appreciates the fact that this ISV partnership with or the solution extension partnership with SAP now puts WalkMe in the hands of 20,000 sellers.
Yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, it puts us in the hands of their ecosystem and their partners. So when you talk about that force multiplier, there it is. It's right there.
It's right there. Right. I mean, what would it take for WalkMe to go get 20,000 resellers? Right. It's a lot of people.
We've all talked about talked about the barrier to entry, right? The barrier to entry here is scale, and that partnership just defines and accelerates our scale.
And then on the Deloitte side, look, what percentage of the Fortune 500 are Deloitte customers? A good chunk, a really good chunk. And a lot, we've actually featured some of the Deloitte digital transformation team on some of our virtual events. I remember specifically, I think it was Predict last year, where we were looking ahead at what digital transformation would be like in 2021. Here we are at the end of it already. And, the fact that they can make this part of that offering is pretty nifty, pretty powerful as well. Because though it may not give you the quantity of resellers, the reach it gives you into very significant accounts, right, is huge.
I think that it's not just the reach into the accounts; it's also the domain expertise, right?
Yeah.
Because when for the longest time, people think software is the answer to the problem. It's actually software in the context of, which is the solution to the problem. And in the book, I talk about shifting from the what and the why. What am I buying? Why am I buying? To how do I use it in the context of, right? Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't be able to scale that side of our business in any month of Sundays, to the domain that these guys have. So when you're trying to deploy it on, a compliance application in the financial sector, we wouldn't understand the implications and the application where they would, because they would come with that domain expertise. So now, when we're trying to solve a problem, it's actually going to be a very, very specific problem that can be quantified based on, a value framework, which then is going to drive cash flow benefit, which then is going to elevate Deloitte even further, but also bring huge amount of credibility to the digital adoption platform known as WalkMe.
Absolutely. Excellent, man. Well, Raj, I got to congratulate you and the whole WalkMe team here. These are two really substantial partnerships. And on top of that, a successful quarter And this would be like your second quarter or your second report as a public company. So that, the first one's kind of a layup because it's baked into your IPO. The second one, not so much, right? So the fact that it was strong is good. And then, you personally, the Dap strategist, right? That's you. So just good stuff all around, man. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
No, I appreciate the time. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the good wishes. The team's just delighted from where we are. We think we're just at the beginning, to be honest with you.
I think this, digital adoption platform market it's just really starting to take off. You know what we do for people who want to get more information? You mentioned your website, dapstrategist.com, is it? But
Yep.
for people who want WalkMe specific, I forgot is it WalkMe.io or WalkMe.com?
It's walkme.com. There's a ton of information there, a lot of case studies, a lot of analyst reports. The team have done a phenomenal job in helping build out the category. I remember, September 2016, walking into the Tel Aviv office, and Rafi, one of the co-founders, was there with 11 other people and another gentleman who you'll know, because if you went to Iceland, you would have met Amir Fahi.
Sure, Amir's my friend. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember walking in there, and slide 4, I was just pretty blunt, and I said, if you're really serious about this, we got to go build out a market category. And this is how Workday did it, and this is how I think we can do it. And to think that in 5 years, there are more quotes about us, in the likes of Gartner, Forrester, Everest. I mean, it's just humbling. But it also comes down to the vision of the founders who saw, the potential when we first started off. Because WalkMe was founded because of a mother's curiosity with technology. Our founder's mother wanted to do an online banking transaction, didn't know how to do it, so she called her son, right? Just think about it, right?
Yeah. No, so we've actually, I think it was when they IPO'd, we actually had Rafi on and we went through that story. And it's what a great story. It's the stuff of legends, right? Cool stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, Raj, we got to run. Come back on. I mean, we don't hear from our WalkMe friends enough. Every 6 months or so, it seems. But, stay in touch with us and keep us posted.
Will do. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Stay safe and, enjoy Thanksgiving.
All right. Be well. Raj
Take care.
Sundresan, dapstrategist.com. Check out his new book. Go check out WalkMe at walkme.com. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Up next, Adi Galvan. Adi is co-founder and CEO of SpeedDB. This is a classic story with SpeedDB. Adi and his team of developers had been using RocksDB, as many of you out there probably use, for a long time. And while it's a great program, there are things that leave something to be desired. So they set out to build a better mousetrap. And they did, and they call it SpeedDB. Adi, it's a good story. The new company just coming out. Adi's going to tell us all about it. Here's now my interview with him.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. We've got a new company and a first-time guest to introduce you to today here on Techstrong TV. We've not covered them before. The company's name is SpeedDB, and my guest is Adi Gelman, who is co-founder, CEO. Adi, did I get all that right?
Adi Gelvan, I'm the co-founder and CEO.
Yes, excellent. All right. So, Adi, look, we've not interviewed anyone from SpeedDB before on Techstrong. So we got to kind of start with a lot of background. Tell us a little bit, tell us the SpeedDB story. And maybe with that story, let's talk about your story, right? How did you come to found the company? What drove you to found it? What was your background? And we'll jump from there.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for having me here. So first, no wonder you haven't interviewed anyone from SpeedDB. We were in stealth mode till a week ago. I would be troubled if you have.
Yes, you would. But congratulations on emerging.
Thank you. So our story begins actually with my two co-founders, Chilik and Mike. They are the smart guys in the room. We worked together in a very known storage unicorn. It's a storage company. It was very successful. And in one of our projects, we needed to find a solution to a very, very painful problem, which was the metadata in the system. And we tried to solve it. There was no really solution in hand, and we had to find another technology stuff or software stack to plug in. And we went to the market, and we were looking for a software stack that would be the metadata management platform. So we went to the market. We saw that storage engines, which is the part in the application that manages the metadata, is a huge market, mainly controlled by companies like Facebook and Google and Apple. And the holy grail in the storage engines was RocksDB. So we said, okay, tens of thousands of customers can't be wrong, including Facebook. So let's use it. And by implementing it into our storage solution, it didn't really work as advertised.
Really?
So we went to Facebook and to the huge community using RocksDB, and we got answers that were full of workarounds. This is how you can work around those challenges. And then we said, okay, workaround is great, but it's not a long-term solution. What we found out, by the way, is that the solution, the storage engine itself, it was very good with small data sets, but it wasn't really good when the data sets scale. Yeah.
Hyperscale. And that's funny because Facebook and these companies, they're hyperscale companies.
Yeah. They are hyperscale company with indefinite data resources and infrastructure resources. So they have no problem to shard every problem and to use their extensive hardware. But for normal customers, if you need to shard, then it's very painful.
Yeah.
And if you're working on the cloud, then sharding is very expensive.
Yeah. So I feel like we recently interviewed, I think it might have been the RocksDB company or another company involved. RocksDB itself is open source, no?
Yes, definitely.
So I'm a big fan of open source. In today's world, everyone's a fan of open source, right? But the fact of the matter is, my personal feeling is that sometimes, because the solution is open source, people will put up with more than they would from a commercial solution. Putting the shards in is a pain in the butt. But you know what? It's an open source thing, and we got to make that square peg fit in that round hole a little bit. So it needs a little work, but it's open source, so you do it. Where if it was a commercial solution, it doesn't work for me. Done. I move on to the next thing. And I wonder if that's not at play here, that people put up with this for as long as they did. Right? Because, it's open source, right? And that kind of attitude. But anyway, go ahead. Continue the story.
Yeah. Interesting observation. I can tell you that today, after working about a year in this open source market, looking at, we actually compete today with open source solution, right? We're going to customers using RocksDB for free, and we try to give them something that they'll be willing to pay for, right?
Yep.
So interesting observation. I can tell you that I see the value of being open source, but I also see some of the disadvantages. But in enterprise solutions, especially when you're talking about data, then you're willing to take additional steps and pay for something that will really give you a solution that you need, and take the heartache and the pains of dealing with open source solutions, especially if they don't fit exactly what you need.
Exactly. Well, I have a friend, Ron Gula. Ron was the founder of a company called Tenable Network Security. Today it's just Tenable. People behind Nessus, stuff like that. And I know Ron 20 years. Ron always used to say, or he still says, when it comes to open source, there's two kinds of freedom. There's free as in freedom, and free as in beer. Right? Some people focus in on the free as in beer, like free beer. There is no such thing as free beer, right? Sooner or later, you pay for your beer. And people who think, oh, it's open source and I'm not paying for it, so I'll put up with more pain or less functionality, they're kidding themselves, because sooner or later, you pay for your beer, right? If you want to do it because it's free as in freedom, and I can customize it and change it and make it do what I want myself, like freedom, that's fine. But the free as in beer aspect of it is a mirage, right? Yeah. There's a total cost of ownership.
Yeah, I heard the saying that says that if you get a product for free, then you're the product.
Right. Well, that's another take on it. Exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I take it to our case, then yes, RocksDB is free, and it's actually a very good product. There are tens of thousands of customers out there using it. The only trouble is that when your data sets scale, then it's for free, but you start paying very, very expensive prices on management, development, and resources that you have to use in order to make it work. And when you do the math, then you'd rather have an enterprise version of this storage engine that will run faster, will be more scalable, and will run on less resources. And in our case, we run 10 times faster, we scale 100 times more, and we run on 80% less resources. So overall, when you pay us as a customer, you save a lot of money, and you get your customers happier, and your systems work smoothly. So I think it's a no-brainer in that case.
Yeah, no, it's a total cost of ownership equation, right? Whether this is what it's going to cost you to use one, this is what it's going to cost you to use the other. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out, right? What's cheaper. So you emerged from stealth. Usually when companies emerge from stealth, there's some event, either a large customer announcement or a financing or something. What made you emerge from stealth in the last week or two?
Yeah, so it's actually, we last week, the launch was actually combined with our anniversary. We're 1 year old.
Okay, very good.
And a couple of months ago, we signed a global agreement with Redis.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, the database company. And for Redis, we actually showed them that on their enterprise Redis, if you replace RocksDB with SpeeDB, then you can actually run twice as fast with half of the resources. So this was a big win-win-win for Redis customers, for Redis and for SpeeDB.
That's great. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And like Redis, we're working with many more customers. We hope to get them on board very soon. But I think that what we showed them all, what we are showing actually today is that with replacing RocksDB with SpeedDB, you can actually do a lot more with a lot less, which is a no-brainer.
Yeah, sounds like a great story. Let's. So it's you and two other co-founders. Yeah,
Yes.
And you're based in Israel.
We're based in Israel. We actually hired our first programmer in the US last week.
Congratulations.
International company today.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. You know what we didn't tell people? What's the website for people to get information?
Our website?
Yes.
Yeah, it's www.speeddb.io.
.io.
Yes.
And okay, so it's not open source, commercial solution. How is it like packaged and sold? How do you how does one engage like that?
Well, our solution is software only stack.
Mm-hmm.
An embedded library that is embedded within your application, whether it's standard application, database, storage, whatever. And it's 100% RocksDB compliant. So if you are a RocksDB customer, you can actually take our library, drop in, and in 30 seconds get it running and see the value.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great. And then how do you determine what you charge a customer?
We have our price list that we disclose with our clients. We have two models. One is with vendors, revenue sharing, and one is with end customers, which is price per node. And okay. I think
so. Sorry, that's kind of traditional.
Traditional, right? Yeah, traditional.
Yep, very cool. All right, we gave the website, Adi. So, as we look out, we're coming towards the end of the year, new year. What do what would success look like in next year for you guys? What do you think would be a successful year?
Oh yeah, so the problem we were born to solve is to create the next generation storage engine. We saw a void in the storage engine space. We see that the upper layer of the application is super scalable. The underlying layer, which is the storage, is super scalable, but the intermediate layer, the storage engine, is pretty much stuck. So we want to be the next generation storage engine. We want to allow application users to run much faster, scale much better, and do it very, very efficiently. And lucky for us, the storage engine market is huge. We want to be this intermediate layer between the application and the storage and help customers run their applications faster, focus on their real business rather than dealing with data scalability.
Excellent. All right. Adi, thank you for coming on Techstrong and telling us about SpeedDB. We want to wish you you and the team there a lot of success. You'll come back. You'll keep us posted about what's happening. And for our audience out there, if you're using Rocks right now and you're running into scalability or you want to try something, maybe the next version, a little better, check out SpeedDB. Adi, thanks. Be well.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right. This is Alan Schimmel, Techstrong. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Next up, we have part 3 of a Mike Jones, the Haunted Hacker podcast. Always a pleasure to have Mike's podcast on here. He has amazing guests. Mike himself is such an interesting guy. Mike's guest today is Kurt Sudzak, former FBI agent and whistleblower lawyer. This is part 3 of a 3-part episode. Let's now go to the Haunted Hacker, Mike Jones.
Well, they've lost touch of that, though. I think that the government as a whole has lost touch with what people actually go through on a citizen level. I think they put themselves so far above us and above the law and above everything that's going on and isolate themselves that they really don't have that in touch and that empathy with normal everyday people.
Yeah, that's the same thing with the military. If you have a president who's the military, I don't want a president who's the military leader. He has the largest military in the world to advise him. He doesn't really need to have that, I need to be the, Caesar or whatever it is. But isn't there something beautiful about having a woman president that doesn't have any military?
Condoleezza Rice was my biggest. If we could have Condoleezza Rice as president of the United States, I would never have anything bad to say about the government ever again. Because she's intelligent, she was effective, she knows what she's doing. But here's the problem, right? So the late Colin Powell, when they addressed him about becoming president or running for president, he said, "The people who are qualified to become president don't want the fucking job."
That's correct.
And it's true because they're a voice and they're a puppet. But the problem is, when we're talking about military, the president has the power to enact, go into war basically without solid, backing. We saw that with Bush, and the war powers are extremely powerful. That's what worries me as a military member, is that here's a guy that can pull the trigger on a war who's never been in war. That's my biggest pet peeve. But the whole loss of contact with humanity and civilians with the government is what's really terrifying me, because even like you look at the way they handle COVID, you look at the way that they address people like normal everyday people, and it's not like it used to be. It's not like during Ronald Reagan's time. We've become basically a different class, and we've put them on a pedestal, and they've taken that pedestal for a run.
I like the fact that government is conflicted, that there are political fights, that people get out there and those moms want to go and complain about the educational system and COVID or no COVID, because that's what this political system is about. Right. We are not supposed to be of one mind. We are of 13. We started with 13 states. We're 50 states. We're a whole bunch of different people, and we all have different opinions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we come to consensus regionally, locally, and sometimes nationally. But that's what makes America the great place it is, because our politics are real. Right. Unlike China, where they're not real, or Saddam's, where 97.9 or 99.7% vote against them. But people. My kids are always like, well, we should get along. I don't want us to get along. Actually, I don't even want the Congress to get along, because if they get along, they just spend more money. If the president hates Congress, Congress hates the president, taxes aren't going up. That's kind of how it works. And when it's important, the U.S. does come together. Right. That seems
as a people.
Yeah. I mean, that's the worst thing. Someone once told me when I forget what it was with Iran, they were pushing something and they're pushing an issue. And one of the generals said, the last thing you want to do is get the U.S. against you, because when the people of the U.S. against you, it doesn't matter. That's what makes us strong. And that's just the truth. That's always been the truth.
Yeah, I think
that's the new world of us.
I think Soleimani experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, well, but that's one of the Soleimani. When he learned a hard lesson, which was that if you want to take over an embassy, the embassy, and he was, I mean, here's a guy who's a genius. I mean, he really was. He's been, and everyone says Soleimani, who is the head of the IRGC, he was extremist. He didn't begin as an extremist.
No.
And he would, and I think he was, for whatever possibility I would have of actually having interacting, and knowing about him, he was a man of his word.
Mm.
He was moderate. But again, in Iran, most people are moderate.
Mm.
I mean, Iran has less people going to mosque than the U.S. has people going to church.
Exactly.
They're more secular. They're not as this. I mean, the government is fanatic, but the people aren't. The people but Soleimani learned, what was it? He learned about, his idea was, if we want to bother the U.S. embassy, we'll do it with unarmed protesters. And that's the weak point with the U.S. The U.S. doesn't know how to handle unarmed protesters. And so they decided they put some protesters by the U.S. embassy, and then all of a sudden he took I think Russia sent a Hellfire missile at him. I mean, was it Israel, Russia? Somebody hit him with a missile, and then he died. But again, you're pushing the envelope there. U.S. is going to protect itself. Mm-hmm. In some way or another, the U.S. is going to protect itself. We're very good at that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
again, Trump, that was... Trump is complex into the point where he was not, I don't think he was very, very friendly to our allies. He seemed to like dictators, but then when it comes to pushing the button, he evidently once considered doing an attack on Iran and didn't do it, probably smart. And then all of a sudden the head of one of our chief adversarial military formations, he just decapitated.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, like I said, Trump knew how to play chess.
Mm.
If he was erratic, it created problems for other people.
Yeah, I think he's still doing that. I think he's still being very tactical and with a strategic mindset as well. Because look at the latest, I guess, public appearances by him and prepping himself for the 2024 election. I think that he's still playing that strategic game, and he knows how to play it. And that's the good thing about him. He knows how to play the game. He knows how to get people to work in certain, I guess, areas and work towards a certain goal. But I still can't get past the fact that, looking at the way the country's gone over the past 10 years, and, when I came back to the U.S. a year ago this month, I walked into a country that had been basically picked apart by COVID. And it just seemed crazy to see like a city like Seattle, where people and protesters had taken over city blocks and was keeping the police out and burning down buildings, government buildings in big cities. It just blew my mind. When I left the country, we were just getting through the end of the war and people were pro-American and patriotic. And I come back and it's like, wait a minute, we're setting shit on fire. What happened in that couple of years that I've been gone? I mean, it's been a huge shift since I think the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that the overreach, I think the government, again, and this is the TikTok thing. People looked at back in, the authority was the thing. When I back in 1992, I think the Connecticut State Police had hundreds of applications. Now the Connecticut State Police can't get anyone to join. The ranks are very thin. People like the authority. Now people look at the authority is somewhat oppressive. But people don't find corporations to be oppressive, which is amazing. So we have the corporations are sneaking there. The respect law enforcement. When the theory of the broken glass theory of law enforcement, if you stop the people from breaking glass and doing minor crimes, you're going to stop the major crimes. But then all of a sudden you have stop and frisk, which then becomes a racial issue. And in the U.S., our weakness is the fact that we had slaves.
Yeah,
and that's still our problem.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I live in the South, and you can still feel that tension.
Yeah.
And as much as we say that we, as a country, we're not that way anymore, we absolutely are.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something that's ever going to go away. When you carry out an atrocity like that on generations of a certain people, that you can't make that up. You can't fix that. And it's not just one race against the other; it's races against all races. And I think that's what divides us as a country.
It wasn't the Klan that oppressed the African Americans and the ex-slaves.
It was a Democratic Party.
That's right. Well, yeah, it was local law enforcement. Was the problem. It was the authority.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, if crime, in the North, we're set. I mean, I was in Louisiana. I actually came back to Connecticut and found Connecticut more segregated than Louisiana, not economically segregated, because all of the African Americans were in a few major cities. And then when you go to the suburbs, they were predominantly white. Now there were Vietnamese, there were some Indians, but the African Americans have not made major gains into the cities. But you go down south. I mean, I still remember seeing signs, and this is after they weren't allowed in Louisiana, that talked about whites only for water fountains.
Oh, you're talking about on the East Texas area of Louisiana,
Lake Charles,
Vidor, Texas, and some of those places. And what really disgusts me, right? So some of my best friends are African American. I just had Blacks in Cybersecurity on. I also had Black Girls Hack, and as a people, like, we're friends on our level, but when you get up to the enterprise level and government, you lose that. You lose it quickly. And that's something I'll never understand, is how we can't get along just because of the color of our skin. That makes no sense to me. And so that's what I try to bring to cybersecurity is we can all do this together. Like, there's no reason to be separate, and there should be no seclusion. Everything should be all inclusive. Whether it be Asian, Black, white, Indian, whatever, it should be one group to fight a common cause. And I think that's the way that the U.S. should be. But politicians and money is what drives that segregation and that hatred. And not to mention, man, you look at the Democratic Party and you look at how they fuel off of that racial tension and how they drive that to boost their voting. It drives me insane. And then the southern border, don't get me started on the southern border. That is out of control.
Yeah, but if you stop, I mean, again here, I think that both parties have benefited from institutional racism.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Both parties. One of the remarkable things that happened recently was Webster's dictionary changed the definition of racism.
Oh, really?
And yes, they changed maybe a year and a half ago. And some young woman, African American Black woman, wrote and said, "This is your definition's wrong," and because it's also supporting the status quo that reinforces racism is also qualifies. And Webster's and their full name I can't remember, but they came back and said you're right, because the institutions. The institutions do, in fact, have been historically biased against minorities. Now, in the FBI, the women are not 50% of the FBI agents.
Really?
In fact, no, they're not. They're much smaller minority, and because of how the FBI does their promotion scheme, basically you have to move around to multiple offices to get promoted. So you have to go from one field office to headquarters, but bounce around 4 or 5 times. But if you're a woman, you're not going to do that because you're a mother. You may be a mother.
Right.
So they have lost this huge pool of great people with huge potential because they're unwilling to bounce around between offices every 2 years to get promoted because they have kids.
Right.
And that's crazy because we don't have that many women, and they should be. When I first joined the FBI in New York, someone pulled me aside and said, "Look, forget about what you're going to work. Get bank robberies, organized crime. Go pick your supervisor." And they're like, "Well, okay, he goes, "No, here's what you do. Pick someone who's a parent. Pick someone who's a parent because they'll treat you like a kid. They'll know you have to be punished sometimes. You have to be treated, given some leeway. But he goes, there's some having, and I take that as not necessarily parents, but life experience.
Right.
People who have a diverse life experience are able to handle people differently.
Right.
Women have that. They
Right.
have been a minority. And the Bureau has not been able to change its management program to get more women in. And they have very few African Americans. They have almost no Middle Easterners. And the one Middle Eastern person I know is actually I'm assisting because he was a whistleblower and he got pretty much wiped out. And his supervisor had a sign on his desk. The supervisor of this man has sign on his desk that said, I'm a pork eating crusader.
Wow.
And this agent was an agent who was blown up in a Humvee with a grenade in the Humvee.
Wow.
And why would you ever insult a guy like that?
I mean, how is that even acceptable to have that sign on your desk in a government facility?
Well, and here's where I go to the institutional thing. I actually know that supervisor was overseas. He was fighting. He was in the New York office during 9/11. He was in the Middle East in 2003 and 4 when people were trying to figure out what the enemy was. People are trying to figure out the Sunnis and the Shia, and it just became kind of institutionalized.
Right.
And if you're not training, if you're not making sure that your people are aware that they bring their own biases to the table, then you forget about them. Then it becomes the norm. And that really is I don't consider this supervisor to be a bad guy. He served overseas, but he did obtain biases when he was over there. Because as you know, when you went over to the Middle East, what was the first thing they told you? You cannot trust an Iraqi to tell you anything true. Right. They'll literally look at you and tell you the sky is red, and they'll believe it. But when you look at it, that was because Saddam Hussein's government would tell them, hey, the sky is red. And if either they nodded yes,
or you got buster-gassed.
Oh, yeah. So all these people had to live in a world where you had to lie.
Right.
And then that doesn't go away in 5 years. That was that had become part of the Iraqi culture. Yeah. And that's really the shame. That's the shame of it.
Yeah, and interrogation tactics are a lot different over there as well. We talked about that previously, the interrogation tactics and how most people believe that, interrogation becomes effective when you inflict pain or fear. But in actuality, it's quite the opposite because they're used to that pain and fear. That's one thing that their government imposed on them. So you come in and try to become a friend or a confidant, shit changes.
I don't know how the U.S. ever got in the business of inflicting any type of pain or torture for interrogation, because we've already been through this once. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It won't work because you'll have people lie, and then you'll make more enemies. I mean, I think the one thing the Bureau does very well is we try to take any person that's a subject, we try to flip them. Mm-hmm. We try to make that subject into our friend, and then we try to get the information out. Maybe we charge them, maybe we don't, and then we put them to work as an informant. Mm-hmm. But they're not. But every person is a potential friend, except when you hurt them.
Right.
And when you hurt them, they'll never be your friend.
Yeah, I mean, look at Guantanamo. We've taken a whole prison full of people and made them potential terrorists now.
Not potential.
Good. True. I mean, some of them have gone back to Afghanistan and are now party leaders in the Taliban. As a matter of fact.
Like number 3 and 4, I think, are party leaders. Yes.
Yeah,
we had them. And in the first Gulf War, everybody surrendered. All the Iraqi military surrendered because they knew that was the best way out.
Right.
In Iraq, there were no unlawful combatants. Mm-hmm. In the war on terror, there were, and you got to treat people differently. But once the U.S. military started treating people in Iraq as unlawful combatants, then that turned very much negative. And that was that. The U.S. has some very interesting standards. One is in our justice system, the basic premise is we'll let 8 people, 10 people go that are guilty to make sure one innocent man doesn't go to jail. So the trade-off is we're going to let guilty people go to protect innocent people. And then when we get to the laws of war, the laws of war don't work against us; they work for us, because people consider us to play fair when all things are equal. Now, Japan, what's been really coming out as history's developed, is one of the reasons Japan was causing their soldiers to commit war crimes. The thought process was because then there was no place to surrender. No one would ever accept a surrender from people that were committing atrocities, and they were correct. They met the Marines, and they turned into this. But we want other sides to surrender. We want other sides we want enemies to become our friends, and we want our people we arrest to help us out.
Yeah,
and think good about us.
Yeah, I remember my military ID card, and on the back of the military ID card is the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
And I swear we have to be the only country that abides by the Geneva Convention to any degree anymore.
But that's okay. Isn't that okay?
It shouldn't be okay. Everybody should.
We are the standard, though.
Right. We are.
We're the standard.
Everybody should be abiding by the Geneva Convention.
But if we don't do it, how can we tell anyone else to do it?
True. Very true.
That if the reason there's a Geneva Convention was because the industrialization of war made war incredibly violent and industrialized. But most places don't treat their prisoners like we do.
Right.
But we have to do it because it works in our favor. It ultimately does work in our favor in all different kinds of ways. Until
the CIA gets a hold of some of these prisons and make them black sites, and then everything changes.
I've never heard of the CIA. Who are they? I joke. I actually did an interrogation of a guy in the Middle East, and he was sitting in a room, and there were 2 Iraqi guards, and he was just being a jerk. And I was being polite as hell. Because my thought process is donut and coffee, and I will crush you by talking to you for 30 hours just because I can talk. So I was in there, and finally, this guy was just being pain, and he was chained up pretty well. I said, "No, what? I need to get a cup of coffee." So I walked out, and then I came back. When I came back into the room, he had sweat. He was sweating profusely. I'm like, "You okay?" He's like, "Oh, I thought that was a code to have these guys beat the living daylights out of me or beat me up." I'm like, "No, I was actually going for a cup of coffee. Here's some coffee." And actually, although he didn't give me any information, because he was about to die, he was subject to a death sentence. His attitude changed, and I knew that if he would survive the time period, he would have cooperated. But people are human. And yes, I get it. But like I said, the reason we push the Geneva Convention is because it helps us. And it's not easy. No. It's not easy to look the other way when other people abuse our soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
I know that's...
And you talk about interrogation. So I thought it was really interesting and kind of brutal. The Iraqis are so used to that kind of treatment. And so when they encounter a U.S. force, they expect the same kind of treatment. I mean, even their Olympic soccer team, who lost a game and went back to Iraq, were all tortured and had their feet beat with cane. It's like that's the treatment they're used to.
But what a difference when they... America, I think the U.S. as a world leader is different because our 2 worst adversaries, Japan and Germany, are now our staunchest allies.
Right.
That the U.S. considers itself to have a number of very close allies, but we also have countries that are so close to us they're not even allies.
Right.
They're Australia, the United Kingdom,
the Five Eyes.
Yes, Denmark. There are countries that survived World War II that are very much they're beyond being allies, and I think that's really where we're unique, and that is a special position in the world. that we're strong because of our allies.
Right.
I think just recently, China was facing down, threatening people in South China Sea, and
Taiwan.
Next thing you know, the British came, and then the Germans came, and I think the Germans had the first ships in like 20 years in the South China Sea. You have Australia, who's now building nuclear submarines. They're there because they get the point that there's this one leader in the world, one United States, that actually is pretty reliable.
Right.
And I think if you say we left Afghanistan, what were we doing there?
I know. I mean, when you look at it, our original interest with Afghanistan was to help them fight the Russians. And we sent the CIA there. We helped equip them. We built their tunnels. We dug their tunnels where bin Laden hid for a while. And that started the relationship with Afghanistan. But I truly, when I look at how we have worked through the ages and how Britain has worked, Britain was infamous at dropping a flag every time they hit landfall. Their empire grew very, very quick. But with the U.S., especially in modern times, if you go to a foreign country and you see a McDonald's or a Walmart, we've been there. Yes. And that's one of the first things that we pop up. We pop up an exchange so the military can grab whatever they need. Next thing that comes is McDonald's and Walmart. We have to Americanize things, and I think that's where the rest of the world kind of gets that negative sentiment because we bring capitalism into their country. And to be honest, capitalism is good in some aspects, but in other ways, it's very poisonous. And I think they only see the poisonous side. They don't see the ability to become somebody through capitalism. But yeah, I mean, just the world in general today is a really interesting place to live. I would have never thought when I was born in the 70s and was growing up in the 80s that I would ever live in a world quite like what we have now, where not only do we have to battle people on a physical plane, but also in a cyber realm that never existed before. And there are a lot of political decisions made based on actions within that cyber realm, which I think is super dangerous. I think we're going to get to a point where the next major conflict may be started in the cyber realm.
It's already going on. I was party to a conversation, I think we talked about it, was that the first casualties of cyber attack have already occurred. People have died because of cyber attacks. That you can't look at if I'm looking at in fact, I was just doing it, the art of war, and then applying the art of war into cyber attacks, that you're going to use those attacks as, initially you can damage a country now, right, by, and this is looking at China, is by doing the shock and awe, hammering our outlying bases that are around China with missiles, then simultaneously attacking the electrical and water supplies, disrupting the infrastructure, and then consolidating your holds, take Taiwan, and then say, okay, now come and get us.
Yeah, and we've been doing that for years on a physical plane, going in, and when we invade a country, taking out their critical infrastructure, communications, power, water. We don't even have to go into those countries anymore. We can do that remotely, and that's the scary part.
And you look at some of these the malware, and there are 340 days built into this malware. I mean, you're like, wow, that is awesome. Because a lot of the attacks that we have, I just was looking. You have one attack. They're using stuff that's 4 years old. They're using Meterpreter. They're doing the reconnaissance correctly, but they're not using state of the art code to do this. They're using old stuff, and it still works.
Well, and that's the sad thing, is that the state of cybersecurity is so bad in a lot of companies and countries that you can look up and see vulnerabilities from like 10 years ago still floating on the internet. You still see. Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. Yeah. And people don't fix it. I mean, I literally have been through 2 ransomware events in the past, couple of weeks that were just shocking, like common sense stuff. But, looking at the way that we conduct war on the internet, as opposed to the way we do physical and kinetic war. I think the difference is now we have people in the younger generations fighting these wars on the internet who have never been exposed or had to go into a combat scenario, right? So everything is not in a realistic concept to them. It's like playing a video game almost. And the people who are trying to defend against that, yeah, we see the downfalls, and we see, where they screwed up on certain code, or even there was one ransomware event where they actually took an off-the-shelf product to encrypt the different devices, which was pretty shoddy. But I think when it really gets scary is when we see state actors and people who are, I guess, educated in the art of war and strategic planning that get a hold of good code. That's when shit's going to hit the fan.
It's one is the priority, because you look at I'm just working on putting a gym together in my house, and the priority was doing 100 different things. If you have a priority of 100 different things, you have no priority.
Right.
And you have to focus your resources on the threats. Matter of fact, I'm working on with the university to prepare a pen testing course, and then red teaming is critical. Every organization, and you look at these organizations that are doing red teaming for compliance only. That's the biggest mistake you could ever make. You need to use your red teaming to actually test your reactions, test your capabilities, test your firewalls, and then you can judge it. Now, here's the thing: they're going to lose,
right? Because
in a short time frame, the red teamers can break in. I assume that they're going to break in and they're going to say, "Hey, look what we got! We won." No, because the adversary is going to break in, but it's not just not breaking in. Once they're in, you can mitigate the damage. You can block them out. You can start doing the things it takes to actually get them out of your system. Because on average, I haven't looked recently, but at one point, the average threat
290 days.
Yes, they're in there forever. So that's the trick. If you get breached, okay, but you have to be able to mitigate this, identify them when they're in there, understand how they're pivoting, and this is why I think that. And I was getting a little confused. We got red, blue, purple, but I do think the purple idea of having blue team that can actually mimic specific threat actors using specific code and specific actions and reconnaissance between red teaming is the essential part of that. Because if you're just relying on antivirus and firewalls and you can't do anything to actually simulate an attack, a specific attack within that, you're really missing an important part of the defense.
Yeah, and I think that ex-military are actually some of the best defenders and red teamers, because we do have that strategical mindset and we do have that militarized kind of behavior. One of the things that we do when we're responding to ransomware or one of those events is microsegmentation, and basically, blocking off communications between devices.
Yes.
But, so red team is important, blue team is important, purple team is important. The part that I think that we're failing at, and this is what used to get to me as a pen tester, is when someone tells me that's not in scope. And to me, an attacker is not going to go, okay, well, that's not in scope, so maybe we shouldn't mess with that. Obviously, that's off limits. That's bullshit. If you hire a red team to do a real pen test and to check your security, there should be no scope. Like, you should be under fire.
Except if the scope you're talking about is in a hospital and you're actually going into the device where there's surgery.
Yeah, but you can still mimic that environment, right? So
that's
move
the
on
other
to
thing.
a range. Yeah.
Bingo. You don't have to do it in the real environment. You can actually create that in a virtual environment to attack it.
Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. Again, but in a lot, and I always laugh when I see the red teams and they're like, okay, the report is always the most important. I think the most important thing.
Right.
But they report all different tasks, what to do, and then the red teamer's like, you should just take this stuff offline. You should just segregate, segment the whole thing. And the people look at like, That's genius. I'm like, no, really, it's not. I mean, this is older equipment. But we're getting the red teams in there and actually have them say, you can go after everything, especially the laptops, because you could take the laptops, create a virtual environment, actually have real laptops in there, and let the red team to go to town on those things for a few weeks prior. And because laptops are huge now, and look at that. And again, the cloud, same thing. You can now take a cloud, you can actually copy the entire thing, put that into a test environment, and then let the red team have. The one issue that you don't have in that is you don't really have the blue team and sometimes able to respond if it's just the environment, because it's not really the blue team's environment to work on unless you actually start making it more complicated. But you're right. I mean, but again, no matter what the blue team does, you're going to be better than it initially. Yeah. If they're able to identify you, they'll be able to lock you out. And then you can try again. I assume that there will always be an exploitation. If everything's at the front, at the firewall, and at the boundary line, demarcation, you're not going. You're going to lose. You have to have that defense in depth, and also you have to have reconnaissance within the perimeter. And all military ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the cyber defense and cyber offensive measurements came from the military. I mean, it came from that military mindset. I thought it was funny you brought up Sun Tzu, The Art of War, because I live by that book. It can be applied in so many different areas, not just, what you do in your job, or not just the military, but in everything you do, relationships, everything. I think that, to me, that's my own Bible is The Art of War. So Kurt, we have hit way past the hour.
I'm sorry.
No.
It was like 10 minutes. I'm sorry. This is exactly what we did the last time.
I know, right? I mean, we could have multiple episodes of just you and I talking. And I think people would be happy with it because we always have such great conversations. But, I want to thank you for coming on the show and taking your time and sharing your story. And it's a really important story, I think. Are there any questions you have for me or for the group that you want to discuss?
No, I have to tell you that I saw the T-shirt or your sweatshirt, which is what every red teamer has to have, the black hoodie, because that is it. And my wife just stole my DEF CON one. I'm like, look, I have to get one, but I'm picking one of those up because that is the best. And oh, by the way, your music beforehand, I was actually writing notes on because I was like, hey, wait, this is all new music I haven't heard on YouTube. So thank you very much for all that.
Yeah, I try to make it to be as close to a real show as possible. And for people who are watching who only see the recorded part of it, we actually meet for an hour before the podcast, and I play a playlist for that week. And I mix in different music that I pick up here and there in different countries. But again, Kurt, thanks a lot. And I need to put you on speed dial because I think someone like you would be a critical asset to have in my back pocket. For sure.
Anytime. I really appreciate talking to you. It was fun. It was as enjoyable as last time as this time. So anytime you want to talk, please give me a call. Okay.
Absolutely.
Ian, thank you very much.
Yeah, let's set it up for if you're available on the 30th. We are having the 1-year anniversary, and maybe you can stop in and be part of it.
I will. I will stop. I will stop in, and if you want to talk, like I said, I appreciate it. Especially if there's some new event that we could talk about and badmouth somebody on.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find something. If not, maybe I can create one. I don't know. We'll see.
Everyone out there, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Take care, guys. Take care.
Have a good weekend.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, for something old today, we're going to reach back to our recent Cloud Native Days with Kubernetes event, and we're going to show you Rob Richardson, Microsoft MVP and author, talking about making Kubernetes how we build things. And it's what you may expect, how to use open source tools available in the Kubernetes ecosystem, more productive, optimized delivery, and developer joy. Of course, it's all about delivering delight, right? All right.
Hi, welcome to Cloud Native Days. Today we're going to talk about making Kubernetes how we build things. All the development tools that we can use to build and run containers differently. Now, it's easy for us to assume that containers are a down thing concern, something over there. But we're going to focus on demoing tools that can help you as you're building with containers. Now, here's the part where I tell you I'm definitely going to post the slides, but there are no slides. This is it. You can get a list of all the tools that we'll look at here on this gist. Let's head over to robrich.org. We'll click on presentations. Here's making Kubernetes how we build things at the top. Click on here and you can get to the list of tools that we're going to demo today. All of that is up on robrich.org right now. While you're here on robrich.org, click on About Me, and you'll see some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a friend of Redgate, a Cyril developer advocate, and AZGiveCamp is really cool. AZGiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities who otherwise couldn't afford software services. We start building software for them Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver the completed software back to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZGiveCamp, or if you'd like a GiveCamp in your neighborhood, hit me up on email or Twitter. GiveCamp is a lot of fun. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot of Docker and Kubernetes training, and I replied to .NET Rocks podcast episode. They sent me a mug, and that's my claim to fame. Woo! So let's dig in. Now, as I'm building containers, a lot of the things I may think of as just happening in the build server. Now, that's okay, but when the time comes that you need to, debug something that runs a little bit differently between your local environment and the container, that's when you need container tools built in. We're going to look at things to start easier, run differently, rebuild faster, visualize container content, visualize cluster content, and ultimately debug inside of containers. Let's start. The first thing that we do is we might say Docker build. I've got this Docker file right here that will pull in my site, and I want to build it. So Docker build, I need a dot for some reason, and then I need a -t, except for that goes here. Hello node. And I spent a whole lot of effort trying to keep track of that. Once I've got that in place, then I say Docker run, and I'll run hello node, and I almost put in the -t. Then I need a p, except for that goes over here, 3000, 3000. I'm still spending a lot of time. Do I need a -d? That's where Docker Compose can be really helpful. I'll say Docker Compose up, and it will do all of the needful things. Now, if it doesn't already exist, it will build it. So here we're building our container and then launching it straight away. Now, if you've ever used Docker Compose, you can see how much all of the details about building and running are taken away from us and abstracted into this Docker Compose file. This Docker Compose file, not there, here. This Docker Compose file includes all of the details to both build and run. So here's that image name, here's the dot, here's the ports 3000 to 3000, and I totally forgot about that environment variable. Glad my Docker Compose file was able to remember that. So now if I come to localhost :3000, I'll be able to see my website. Perfect. Now, one of the things that's really cool is that Docker Compose will create a new virtual network every time. Now, maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want just to run with the normal network. That's where I have network mode of bridge. When I have network mode of bridge, then it won't create a new virtual network, and now I can start multiple Docker Compose files. Maybe one is my dependencies, one is my backend API, and then I can run my front-end API just regularly. That's perfect. Docker Compose is great. Now when I'm ready, Control-C, and I will say, let's wait for it to come down, Docker Compose down, I'm not sure if it'll capture it. It's still coming back down. Docker compose down. And now that container is gone. Perfect. That was awesome. Next up, let's take a look at running differently. Now, if I'm running inside of Docker, I could definitely click the Enable Kubernetes button, and that will definitely give me both Docker and Kubernetes. But what if I want to run differently? Docker Desktop is really good at kind of hiding the internals. What if I want the internals exposed version? That's where I'll flip over to Minikube. Now, Minikube is a really cool environment that allows us to spin up a Docker runtime environment. Once I say Minikube start, now I've got that environment ready to go. Now it creates a new virtual machine. So here's my Minikube virtual machine, but I could have other instances. So for example, I have 2 other Minikubes for different demos as well. Now, once I've got Minikube ready to go, I can say Minikube Docker env. I'll give it the shell of PowerShell in this case. And now it'll spit out the environment variables I need to be able to configure Docker specific to this environment. Now, once I've set these environment variables, I'm able to interact with Docker in exactly the regular way that I was used to. I'll set these environment variables, and now Docker image list, and I've got my cluster ready to go. Simultaneously, it also spins up a Kubernetes environment, so kubectl get all, and we can see that right now, nothing's running in the cluster. Perfect. Minikube is great at doing the internals exposed mechanism. So one thing that we can't do with Docker Desktop, Docker SSH, now we're inside that virtual machine and we can just wander around. One of the things I often get asked when I'm looking at containers for the first time is, where is that content stored? And the answer is, well, it's inside this WSL mechanism. Here, I can go to var lib docker volumes. I'm not sure I got that path exactly straight, but now I can just wander around and I can see the actual content on my drive. That's perfect. The other interesting thing with Minikube is instead of automatically proxying the port and the volumes, I need to do a little bit of that manually. Now it is going to spin up a new virtual machine, so instead of connecting to localhost, I connect to Minikube. Perfect. So with Minikube, I have this alternate runtime. Next, let's look at rebuilding. Now, I would really like to do something like Docker watch, but Docker watch is not a thing. So instead, scaffold dev, let's take a look at Scaffold. Scaffold is a tool that allows us to automatically watch a folder and rebuild a container, optionally push it into a container registry, and then start it up on Kubernetes straight away. So when we say scaffold init, it will spit out this YAML file that will allow us to configure it. And then once we hit scaffold dev, then our system is running. Let's flip over to the scaffold file that I built in this case. Now here's that scaffold.yaml, and it knows the name of my container. It knows the name of the, or actually in this case, the name of the scaffold file, the name of the image that I want to build, and the Kubernetes YAML file that I want to start. In this case, my Kubernetes YAML file includes both a deployment and a service so that I can start this up straight away. So now that I've got this content going, let's go look for that port, kubectl get all. I see that I've got this node port set here. I am using Minikube, so let's go to Minikube 30706, and we'll see our site straight away. Now, in this case, I want to change this. Instead of hello Nebraska code, I want to say hello to Cloud Native Days. Hello, Cloud Native Days. Let's save it. And then automatically, this is going to go rebuild that process. Now, in this case, it's rerunning my Docker build. I've got that ready to go. It's now going to deploy, and it's pushing it up to my Kubernetes cluster. Now, if I hurry, kubectl get all, I can see it terminating the old container and starting the new container. Now, once that old container is all the way gone, It may take it a second. Then I can come back here and I can refresh on the site and I'll get the new content. Oh, it looks like it's going to take it a minute to terminate that container. That's fine. Almost there. The other part is I would love a kubectl watch. There we go. So the old one is terminated. I'll refresh and I now see the new content here in place. Perfect. So Scaffold is great for automatically building and noticing changes. Now let's look at mechanisms to be able to visualize content. So I'm going to start off by looking at dive hello node 0.1. Dive is a tool that allows us to visualize the contents of our containers. Now, as we look at a container, it will let us cruise through the layers and see the files at each layer. Now, we do have a Docker inspect command, so we can say Docker inspect or Docker history, hello node 0.1, and that will tell me all the commands, but that doesn't necessarily tell me the contents in that container at that spot. So let's use dive. Now with dive, I can start to wander up and down through these layers. Here's where my Docker file starts. We've got our workdir, and so flipping over here, we can take a look at this. Let's close this folder and this folder. Let's close the opt folder. And now let's go back to copy. Oh, we copied all of our files. We can see that we copied our server.js. That's perfect. But we also copied our Docker Compose and our Docker file. It looks like my .docker ignore file isn't sufficient. Let's come back in here. We'll create a new file, .docker ignore, and we will ignore Docker file and docker compose.yaml. Now, if I had the scaffold running, it would automatically rebuild that container and I could take a look at it. But dive was a great way to be able to look at the contents of our container and see the layers that were built. Next up, let's take a look at visualizing our cluster. Let's take a look at Lazydocker. Now, Lazydocker is a really elegant tool that allows us to, from the command line, visualize the details of our services, our containers, our images, and I love that you can click through to each piece. Now here on Windows, we actually can't click into our, oh, we can click. So we can navigate this way. If we're using a command prompt rather than PowerShell, then we don't have the ability to click, and that's where I'll flip into the docs and take a look at how I would navigate through these containers. Now I love that I'm able to look at this content. Let's look at this container and I can see the CPU usage and I can wander through the content of that container. That's perfect. So Lazydocker. Next, let's look at a different way of visualizing our cluster. Now in this case, I'm going to use Portainer. Docker compose up. Let's spell it correctly. Docker compose up. Now with Docker compose up, we can take a look at Portainer. Portainer is a great way to look at a cluster in the Docker perspective. So we'll look at images and volumes and containers, and it's a great way to visualize it. I'll come here to Minikube 9000. That's where it started Portainer, and we're ready to go. Now I need to create a password. This is the first time I've logged into it. So let's log in. And now we could choose to remotely manage a cloud-based cluster. We could put an agent inside of our on-prem cluster. We could look at a remote cluster. In this case, I'm going to look at my local cluster. Now it is telling me that I need to make sure to map my Docker socket into place, but I came here into the Docker Compose docs and downloaded the Docker Compose file that allowed me to do this. So here's that Docker Compose file, and we see that we've already got that Docker sock set in place so that we're able to connect to our cluster. Now with this permission, we're actually able to do a whole lot more, so you definitely don't want any normal containers running this way. I've also got a volume for my login details. So back here in our dashboard, let's take a look at it. We'll connect. I'll look at my local one. Here's all the images that I have, and yeah, I've got a few. Looking at my volumes, I don't have any. Oh, I do have a few volumes in place. I can take a look at my containers, and I see that Portainer container. That's pretty neat. Let's add a new container. Now I'm going to name this Hello Node container, and we will use the Hello Node v0.1 and start it. Now, once we've got this container launched, we can start to look at the container details. So here's my Hello Node container. In this case, I forgot to map ports, but we can dig into how this container works. We can take a look at the console logs right here. Here's the logs. We can see that my server is started. That's perfect. We can also take a look at the container details. Now, if we say Docker inspect in the terminal, that content is pretty verbose, and it might take us a while to wander through it. But here we can just open up the details. So for example, it's really neat to be able to go grab the IP address of this container if that's necessary. Back in the container view, I can also look at the console. Now, in this case, it's an Alpine-based container, so I'll flip from bash to ash, and I will connect here from the browser. Now I'm actually looking at my container contents. There's my server.js, and we've got that process message reported there. Now, if my container didn't start correctly, or if it's not running, this can be a really handy way to go look at stuff. Now, I definitely need to not change content here, but it's a great way to understand the content. Another way for me to see that my Docker file and Docker compose file are still here. Okay, now that we've got this container, now that we're done with this container, let's actually remove it. Yes, I do want to remove it. And now we see that that container is no longer running in our cluster. Now we do want to secure this dashboard very carefully because we were able to spin up new content in our cluster. We don't want to give this permission to outside users. In this case, I'm just running it on my local machine, so I think that's working out pretty well. Docker compose down, and let's take down that Portainer visualization. That was the Docker visualization of things. Let's flip over and look at the Kubernetes visualization of things. kubectl apply k8 dash apply dash f k8 dash. Let's take a look at k8 dash, which is now called Schooner. They're rebranding themselves. So here, this k8 dash dashboard allows us to visualize the Kubernetes side of things. Pods and services and deployments, as opposed to just containers, images, and volumes. Now that we've got our k8 dash in place, kubectl get all. Let's take a look at what port it launched it on. There we go. And we'll come back to localhost this port, and we'll be able to look at our dashboard. Now, our first step is to enter our auth token. Unlike the built-in Kubernetes dashboard, authentication is definitely built in. So I've created a secret that allows me to log in. Let's set that in place here. And now we're logged in. Now I can take a look around my cluster. It's fun to see. In this case, I only have one node. I can take a look at the namespaces. Here's the namespaces in my system. And let's take a look at the storage. I like looking at volumes because it's really easy to accidentally miss a volume and leave it running. And so it's kind of nice to be able to clean that up. I'm also going to look here in accounts and look at secrets. I could choose to filter by a specific namespace. In this case, I'll leave it on all namespaces. Wow, I've got a lot of secrets in my system. Do I need all of them? This was a cool way to visualize that. I'm going to switch over to the default namespace, and we can see this k8 token right here. This is the token that I use to log into the website. And because this cluster is only running locally, then I don't mind showing this. But yeah, that's the password I use to log in. Perfect. So K- is a really elegant way to be able to visualize the Kubernetes side of things. The deployments and pods, the services and ingress controllers, the volumes and secrets. Let's take down the K-, kubectl delete -f K8-, and let's look next at debugging. Now I'm going to specifically start this folder here inside VS Code, and we'll take a look around and see the content available to us. Now it will take it a minute to start up, so while it's starting up, let's take a look at how it works. Reopen in container. Yes, I would like to reopen it in a container. That's perfect. Now, how does this work? Well, the first step is I came into the extension manager and I grabbed the remote containers extension. Now, there's the remote containers extension. There's also a remote WSL extension. There's also a remote SSH extension, or you can grab the remote development extension, which includes all three. Now, this is great. You can get the same experience if you're debugging a site maybe on a Raspberry Pi over SSH as you can inside of containers that we'll show today. Once you've got this plugin installed, now I'll come down here into the corner. Now, I could choose to try a development container sample. I'll pick my language and it will spin up a development environment in that language. Now that's great if I just want to code something quick in a language and I don't want to install all of the details of that system inside my local machine. Once I've got that ready to go and I want to start including this in my current project, I can say add development configuration files. Now, once I pick this, it will again look at my language and be able to build up the details associated with that piece. Once I've got that content in place, then I get this mechanism for being able to run inside of a container. Now, here's that .dev container folder, and inside there, a dev container.json file. This is that configuration file. Now this configuration file allows me to look at all of the details. I can start with a base image, or in this case I used a Docker file. Now this Docker file is not the Docker file that produces my production container, rather a specific Docker file for this debugging experience. Now I chose to install Git and curl in case I need to do any content inside of VS Code, like committing my content, but that isn't necessary. I could have just built on top of the Node Alpine image. You notice that I don't have a CMD command. VS Code will take care of that. Back in our dev container JSON, we can then do a post create command. I want to do an npm install after this fires up in a container. Now, how does this work? Behind the scenes, VS Code splits itself in half. Half of it runs locally, where I can do theme and UI type of things. I can install my favorite font and colors. And the other half runs inside the container. There's an exposed port that connects them to, and also a volume mount. Here inside the container, we have our language service and our compiler and our debugger. Now, through this exposed port, we can connect to that process running inside the container. So running inside this container, I might have additional settings. What extensions do I need to install to be able to get my debugging experience or my linting experience? I've also chose to forward some ports. If I launch my container, I want to be able to forward this back to my local machine. Because I'm using Minikube, I also have this volume mount that allows me to get from my local machine into that container so that then I can just mount it from /mnt/nodeapp. So now that I've got my dev container in place, here's my server.js and we're ready to go. I'll set some breakpoints here and here. And let's run this as we would run any system, debug any Node app. Now we start by starting up our application, and we can see that we've got our breakpoint straight away. Now, if we mouse over our variables, we can get that experience of being able to look at the environment around us. We get the call stack, the watch window, all of our variables in the normal way. Let's push play. Now that we've got our server running, we can come here not to Minikube 3000, but rather localhost 3000. It's proxying it from VS Code back to our local machine. Now, the cool part about this is whether this container is running in a cloud like Azure or AWS, or running locally on our development machine, we can do this same debugging experience through localhost. Great, we've hit our breakpoint. Now we can mouse over and start to interact with the variables as we normally would inside of Node. Let's take a look at the request and the response, and we can do all of the debugging that we need to. I'm going to unstop this breakpoint, and now we'll get our content loaded into our browser. There we go. We've been able to debug our container. Now, this is great. We've been able to debug our content and take a look at our environment. We don't need Node installed on our local machine in this case because it's installed inside of this container. Once we're done, we'll come in here, close remote connection, and we're back to just regular VS Code that is running in one place. We've been able to look at mechanisms for starting differently, looking at container contents, rebuilding containers automatically, visualizing containers, visualizing clusters, and ultimately debugging containers. All of these tools are available in our local environment to be able to debug really elegant places. You can get all of the tools here from this GitHub gist and take a look at the tools that we built and replicate these demos. Thank you for joining us here at Container Days. I'll see you in that spot that the conference has designated for Q&A. Or if you're watching this online later, hit me up on Twitter at Rob_Rich and let's continue the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for challenges facing the cybersecurity industry, covering all aspects of InfoSec, data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, AppSec, network and endpoint security.
Next up, I have a series of interviews here with our Chief Operations Officer, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene's guests today are Michael Huffaker, Director of Threat Intelligence at Threat Quotient. Charlene has a good interview with him. We'll go to that now.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Michael Huffaker, who is the Director of Threat Intelligence at Threat Quotient. Michael, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. Really do appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Great. So I'm interested in talking to you about the state of cybersecurity hiring, because I know that is a hot button issue for a lot of organizations as they're struggling with cybersecurity in general, and filling the roles that are open these days seems to be almost a feat for any organization to accomplish. And so interested in finding out from you, based on your current role over at Threat Quotient as the Director of Threat Intelligence, but also you were former intelligence analyst over at the Department of Defense. So I'm sure you've seen both the public sector and the private sector methodologies, if you will, ways of hiring. And so I guess the first question I have for you is, why is it so darn difficult?
That is a good question. I think there's a lot of difficulty on both sides, really, from both the perspective employee and then also from the hiring side. I've seen a lot of, in my perspective, maybe a little bit controversial, especially in the pandemic, as people were losing their jobs. I knew tons and tons of highly qualified cyber professionals that simply couldn't get a job. And what I've seen to be the most prevalent issue has a lot to do with the job descriptions being this just huge amalgamation of roles. So you'll see a senior leadership role that also requires a great deal of technical experience. And so it seems like both sides are crying a little bit of pain, but it seems like there's a little bit of onus on both sides as well, because you also have some of the employees or people seeking employment who are coming to the table with extremely unrealistic demands in terms of salary and benefits and things like that. So I think we're starting to see kind of this reckoning in the industry of both sides colliding, where just nobody's really on the same page. Or at least that's what it feels like to me.
No, that's an interesting point of view, and it's funny because I've been having this conversation with a number of different folks in the industry, both practitioners and vendors and analysts, and I keep hearing the thing that companies are trying so hard and they're diversifying their hiring practices to actually look for folks who really don't necessarily have the cybersecurity experience, but they do have other positives, I guess, to their resume that make them an attractive candidate to move into the cybersecurity space. But to your point, you look at all the job postings and they're looking for somebody who's entry level, but they have to have all these certifications and this and that. And it seems like there's more disconnect from the company side than there is in the employee side. But then again, I'm sure if I asked a cybersecurity job candidate, what do you think is an appropriate salary? Do you think you're asking too much? And of course they're going to say no. So I don't think anybody's going to own up to the fact that maybe what they're asking is a little unrealistic. So,
well, yeah, exactly. And I think that there's just really no way to gauge it because, I mean, obviously cybersecurity is somewhat of an old industry, but generally speaking, it's relatively new. So I don't think we really have that long-term history of industry growth and salary expectations that you can I think a lot of people know, okay, I'm going to go work at a bank at this level. I pretty much know what I'm going to make. If you work cybersecurity at a bank, it's a totally different scale because they're competing with kind of the whole West Coast Silicon Valley side that was like, hundreds of thousands of dollars and buses and ping pong and beer. And I think that as the industry matures and grows up, and I don't mean mature in like a business sense, but actually matures, those things don't mean as much to people anymore. After the pandemic and everyone's spending so much time at home and reevaluating what's important to them, things have shifted. And so it's going to be interesting to see how those companies sort of change their benefits to de-emphasize perhaps money, but re-emphasize, work-life balance and things like that. But we're seeing the salary transparency laws that are coming through. And I know Colorado for sure. And I think California, they're at least giving ranges. I think that's going to help people pinpoint and understand their level, their experience, and kind of what they're up against a little bit better than just kind of like, well, I know somebody that lives in this state that makes this much and somebody that lives here that makes that much. So I'll just average the two and add 10 grand or whatever it is. Like everyone has their own kind of calculus on what they think they're worth. And it doesn't seem to have a standard at all.
Yeah. So do you think that we might actually see kind of an evening out of cybersecurity salaries as we do see more transparency into what the salary ranges are and this kind of evening out to the point where it really doesn't matter where you live, whether you're in California, which is obviously a high salary area, depending on where you are, and then say Iowa, where there's not a lot of as much call, I guess, if you will, for qualified cybersecurity personnel. I mean, obviously the jobs are there, but they're not to the extent, and the cost of living is lower. And there are also, all these other factors that kind of go into determining an appropriate salary. But do you think that we may actually see kind of this, kind of an evening out, for lack of a better term,
I should hope so, because I think that, first of all, salary negotiations are weird and uncomfortable, I think, especially for women and for people of color. All of that's been kind of proven out. So it's an awkward thing to do. And it feels a little bit like an adversarial position to be in, like who can talk who the lowest. And it's just not pleasant. So I think that if there was at least some equalization in terms of just ranges and things like that to give people an idea, that has very little to do with where you live, because I don't think you should be paid for what you need as much as for what you bring to the table. So if you're truly evaluating someone based on their skills and their ability to contribute to your mission, then I don't think it matters if they live in Iowa or downtown San Francisco. They're still of a value to the company. And so I think hopefully those companies will stop seeing people as assets in a physical sense and more as, some sort of intellectual capital that they can continue to invest in.
So you said something that kind of caught me when you said, negotiation is awkward, especially for women. And I wonder if because of that transparency, that it will be less of a conversation regarding, what gender you actually are. And, we've had these conversations before in all areas of IT and basically in business in general, that women are traditionally paid less than men. So I certainly hope that this transparency will mean that, regardless of what your gender is, that you will make make a salary that is appropriate, and it really should not matter whether you're male or female. But do you think that also this might actually open up the cybersecurity sector, if you will, to even more diversity and more inclusion, regardless of not only your gender but also your race or your ethnicity or even where you live?
I do. And I'm hopeful for that, because I think, along the lines of with gender, people of color and even people who live in remote places that are highly skilled are immediately disinclined to apply for these jobs. It's like, well, I can't compete with somebody that lives in San Francisco. So they just don't try a lot of times. And I think by setting the playing field just at a level and making it as even as possible, that gives everybody the opportunity to kind of step onto the field and say like, hey, I want a shot at this. I think I can do this. And so I hope that happens. I hope it also will diversify what you were saying in the beginning about skill sets. We see a lot of people that come in from any really high stress job, like EMTs, paramedics, those kinds of folks. We see a lot of people who have come from sort of businessy backgrounds, like more business analytics that can easily transfer their skills over. But again, there needs to be that playing field where they are willing to even put themselves out there and take that shot. And so I think that just transparency in general and equalizing in general will naturally bring about an evolution of diversity, I hope.
So how realistic do you think this is?
I don't know. I mean, it's state by state. Right. And you'll see a lot of companies now that are posting job opportunities everywhere but California and Colorado to avoid disclosing those salary regulations. I think it's going to take a lot of onus on the companies and on the employees to say, hey, maybe we should share our numbers internally. Maybe we should look across the board and make sure everyone's kind of trued up to the right number and that we've eliminated as much bias as we can. And then also, I think, that the hiring managers need to work really closely with HR to eliminate some of those just unicorn job descriptions that are absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. And I think all of those are really feasible steps in small little bite-sized chunks, but it is going to have to be an evolution. I think it's going to take time to get there.
In my mind, I don't think we can get there soon enough, because we keep talking about the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and I think companies are doing themselves a disservice by kind of playing these games with salary and these what you said, unicorn job post. I like that. It's like these people don't really exist. So, but if you can find somebody who's sort of there, I think companies will be happy. But it seems to me if we could just kind of get to a place where the job listings are realistic, the salaries are realistic, and the people who are most qualified, and even the ones who aren't as qualified, I think we'll see more gravitation toward actually applying for these jobs that they fit in very well because they do have the skills, they do have the qualifications. And if they don't match the job requirements exactly, they may have the quote unquote soft skills necessary to really excel in cybersecurity. But I think to your point, I think the entire hiring process actually kind of puts up a lot of barriers for a lot of people, especially in cybersecurity, because there are just so many hurdles that have to, that candidates have to kind of jump over to, not only to prove that they are qualified for the position, but even afterwards, in getting a salary that is fair and equitable for everybody. But yeah, there are some definite changes that need to happen in that space.
And you brought up my government and military experience before, and I think that's one thing that the military certainly, and the government to some extent, although it's such a big kind of cumbersome beast, it's difficult. But they invest in a person, and then they grow that person's skill set. Obviously, you have to pass some minimum threshold. When you're joining the military, you take your tests, your ASVAB, and then you kind of get slotted into a career field, and then from there you're developed, because the people are the assets of the government and the military, not necessarily how much you can get out of them. And so there's a lot of investment and a lot of development and a lot of ability to cross-train. So I think that that's one thing that they've done exceptionally well, but that model of recruitment and growth pans out really well for them. The problem then is that you max out on salary. And so you get a lot of brain drain from the government back over to the private sector. But that, direct career path, that investment, that growth is, you brought up retention in the beginning, is a huge part of that. People don't want to stay in a company where, I call it line of succession promotions, which is kind of a brutal way to talk about it. But, it's almost like somebody has to die before you get promoted or quit, or they hire in over people. They'll hire a manager in on top of a team that's been there for a while. And that just really, really de-emphasizes the investment in culture, I think. And people get really kind of just put off by that and leave. So you get that loss of employment as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think organizations that can look within themselves and find those folks who do have the capability, not only, they might not necessarily have all of the skills and the expertise right now, but if they can at least identify those people who can be tomorrow's leaders, tomorrow's, C-level executives, so maybe even a company could actually really capitalize on their current human capital, if you will. But in the cybersecurity space, I wonder if it's different. Because basically what we're talking about can be applicable to any part of the organization. In cybersecurity, though, it does seem like it's an especially difficult nut to crack.
I think so. For a couple of reasons, though. One, cybersecurity is an extremely broad term. No, yeah. I mean, it encompasses everything from software development all the way through management and everything in between with threat intelligence. So whenever we talk about an industry, that would be, to me, sort of like saying finance is suffering some sort of shortage, whenever it's really, I think, only representative of a small subset of people that are part of that industry. Because like I said, I don't see it. I see a glut of prospective employees and a dearth of roles, which is just completely opposite of what you're reading. But I do think that cybersecurity will continue to be difficult because it's such a dynamic field. Even if you're a software developer, you have to learn new languages constantly to keep up with the times. If you're, I've done threat intelligence for now 15 years, and some of the adversaries that I think are contemporary now probably aren't, because I'm doing other stuff in my role now. So I think there is this constant training that has to take place that keeps people both kind of irreplaceable and also like immediately replaceable, because it takes people off the production line, if you will, for them to retrain and maintain. So I do think that there will continue to be a struggle. But you see things, Microsoft just announced a huge investment in cybersecurity education through scholarships and community colleges. And I think initiatives like that are phenomenal and will certainly help fill some of those lower level, highly technical jobs. So it's almost like we're taking a sort of vocational school approach that could very well be needed to slot in among those people who have developed skill sets over time.
Yeah, and those people could be the great, those are the ones who could move up in the organization as they get more experience and more certifications and expertise under their belt. That's a great way to kind of seed your team, if you know what I mean. It's a great tactic that I think more organizations should adopt.
Yes, for sure.
Well, Michelle, thank you, or Michael, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for having that conversation. I really do appreciate it. It's a great topic, and it's one that I have the conversations all the time with folks in the cybersecurity space about hiring and the skills gap and what's needed these days. And you're right, there's a huge disconnect there. And I think if we can all start to kind of speak the same language and get on the same level playing field, if you will, I think cybersecurity as a sector, I think is going to be in a much better place than it is right now. But for now, thanks again for having the conversation. I appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Next interview is another one with Charlene. And in this one, Charlene's going to interview PJ Keimer, CTO and co-founder of Illumio, with some recent news coming out of Illumio around Zero Trust. Now we'll go to that.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm here now with PJ Kerner, who is the CTO and co-founder of Illumio. PJ, welcome back to Techstrong TV. Great to see you.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Zero Trust and in the cloud, because, obviously Zero Trust has been a major topic of conversation among organizations, especially over the last almost 2 years now, with the the shift to remote work. And while we were talking about Zero Trust even before the pandemic, but it really has taken on new sense of urgency since in the last 18 to 19 months or so. And when we're talking about the cloud, it almost seems like it's been kind of a different animal as far as security is concerned. There are so many different aspects to cybersecurity in the cloud, and I think that Zero Trust actually can play a very large role in locking down security in the cloud. But I'm interested in taking the pulse from you, if you will, regarding Zero Trust security in the cloud. Where you guys see adoption happening right now, and what are some of the things that organizations are kind of doing as far as Zero Trust in the cloud is concerned?
Yeah, I think where one thing I like to start with is like Illumio from the get-go. Since Andrew and I started the company, has really been focused on this least privilege model for securing people's environments, and it was to address the lateral movement risk that ransomware and malware, has on those environments. So we've been focused on that for a long time, and the Zero Trust word has come into the psyche of the industry much more recently, and now. I think your point about the cloud is interesting in that there are some new things going on. We can talk about a few of them. And so the number one thing is people are adopting multi-cloud environment. They're becoming multi-cloud, whether it's the business driving them. So there might be a reason to move to AWS or a reason to move to Azure because we are a Microsoft sort of shop, or a reason to move to Google maybe because of all the new AI stuff. So people are adopting these environments, or they're hybrid, right? In that we have customers who are I'll say a pharmaceutical manufacturer. They have equipment on the factory floors with compute next to it, and they need to talk to their AWS infrastructure. So they're hybrid, and they'll be permanently hybrid. And where risk crops up is between these diverse infrastructure. So between AWS and a on-prem infrastructure, or between AWS and Azure and those environments. So it's interesting that there's these points of connection between these diverse infrastructures where at least our customers are talking about the public cloud.
And do you see that those kind of in-between points, if you will, are those becoming attack vectors in and of themselves? Areas where cyber attackers are able to kind of get into the network?
Well, I think any place there's excessive privilege, because when operations people or application owners trying to put applications together, well, they have to think about the security controls, and people are doing DevSecOps, and they're thinking about it, but you really need to get the application running. So there's this tension between functionality and operations and security. And if you don't have the right visibility, then you're gonna actually choose operations over security. And those are places where attackers can get in, and you can get lateral movement risk. So yes, that, and the place between the diverse infrastructure it becomes a big hole for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think part of the issues that have cropped up over the last 18, 19 months or so is the fact that there were a lot of organizations that if they were already in the cloud, to your point, they were adopting multi-cloud strategies. And if they weren't using the cloud, except maybe a SaaS application here and there, they're now kind of moving much more deeper into using cloud services and maybe even cloud infrastructure and AWS and Azure and the Google Cloud to do a lot of what they maybe had done on-prem before when they were all in the same location. So do you think that some of the issues that have cropped up are due to, is it more of a lack of visibility, or do you think it's actually got more to do with a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding regarding what is available and, maybe whether they've even configured things correctly?
I don't think it's about misunderstanding. I mean, if you look at some of the other trends, going back to the DevSecOps, there's like distributed ownership is actually there's innovation and this distributed ownership, which allows people to move fast and capitalize on that innovation, which is a very positive thing. Except distributed ownership, leads to a lack of understanding the big picture, right? Because there's so many people involved. So yes, you need to, and that's what, when we talk to our customers, it's like, well, I want to see how component A was put together, and we looked at it, and it's secure. And component B was assembled and is secure. Now we put component A and B, and forget making C and D and E and F in there. Right. And now our system, right, even though the individual components we thought were good, our system is no longer secure. And you need the big picture view, right, of your environment to be able to get that. And that's where people, it's around that, seeing the big picture that I think people are struggling with and need solutions for.
Yeah, it sounds an awful lot like herding cats, working about all these different components and being able to kind of manage everything at once. Having a very large lasso, I think, helps. So, what do you propose then for organizations that are grappling with this issue? As far as visibility is concerned, I mean, do you think that there are maybe certain technologies that are out there, but are there certain business practices that organizations need to keep in mind when they are adopting multi-cloud strategies or hybrid cloud, and they really need to kind of keep that focus on visibility? Are there certain things that they can keep in mind?
Well, I think if we go back to the zero trust, zero trust strategies. I mean, zero trust is a strategy. It's something that you're going to achieve over a long period of time. And I know it's bubbled up to the boards. We saw the Biden mandates. But we can't boil the ocean, right? Like, I mean, people want zero trust and they want it tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. But you can make progress, right? And what we've been, talking to customers, and a lot of our successful customers are ones who find small little ways to reduce that lateral movement risk and make their way on that path to zero trust, and then report to their board, right, and their CEO, and said, "Here's what we did. Yeah, we took this step. We removed this risk from the environment." For example, we talk with customers who just want to remove unencrypted protocols from their environment. They know those are places of risk, or certain, RDP or certain other kind of management traffic, right? They want to control that. They control that, so they can go attack that small problem, reduce that risk as they sort of tackle the bigger problem of zero trust across that environment. So that is one strategy. Which is working. Start small with quick wins. The other strategy that we've seen work well is kind of a line in the sand strategy, which is no further. Like, okay, we'll go figure out what happened in the past and what existed and what got put in place, years ago. But no new further things will happen without a zero trust segmentation strategy in place. And that at least sort of gives people a level of comfort. Like, they're not done. But that at least go forward, will all our new infrastructure that we put in place, whether it's on-prem or in the public cloud, will have a good, zero trust footing to start with. And both those two strategies are really helpful.
Well, that is great advice for any size organization, regardless of whether they're working on-prem or in the cloud or in a hybrid environment. So do you actually see the problem of this, well, actually, I should say, do you actually see zero trust adoption increasing as more organizations understand and see the value of such a strategy? Especially since it's become part of the vernacular these days. So, do you actually see increased adoption of it, or are companies still kind of doing this kind of piecemeal security strategies?
Yeah, no. So we definitely, like, maybe if you take 1 or 2 years ago, it's like you had to convince people that zero trust was the right thing to do. I think we're past that. Now people are convinced and people are doing it, broadly. Now it's, how do we do it, right? Like, and people get stuck on the, how to start, what's the right place to start, so that's where we sort of see this start. We see customers who come to us and say they know their zero trust strategy, and they know exactly what they want, and then they can get stuff done incredibly quickly. And then others who come and say, well, we know we need zero trust, but we don't know how to do it. And then we actually work with them and, share our experience, leading, successful zero trust projects, with them and try to get them, on the right path to that.
What about awareness of zero trust cybersecurity and just good cybersecurity hygiene? Do you see that increasing within organizations and kind of across the board with not only like the C-suite and the IT and cyber and security departments, but also with the employees themselves? Do you see a heightened level of awareness around cybersecurity and what organizations and individuals need to do to keep their data protected and their networks?
I do. I think everybody understands that they have a role to play. Even from not clicking on that suspicious email link. And so I think, I think, in the past we've seen, like, again, the operations team say, not cooperating with the security team. I think there's much more cooperation out there. We know it's a team sport, right? All the way, even if you're not in the IT area. And I see a lot of, and there's a lot of companies focused on that. We've actually done these, internally done these, tabletop exercises,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which actually is really fascinating. It's kind of a compelling way to sort of get people involved in, well, what would a cybersecurity incident look like if we were to have one? And what would we do? And who plays what role? And it's kind of actually a fun exercise to do and get people to involve. So there's a lot of people working on, infusing this into the, the organization. And yeah, so I see it, and I hopefully, it continues.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's interesting to see how different organizations are approaching cybersecurity awareness and education now that there are so many different things that are making headlines daily regarding cybersecurity threats and breaches. And so it's nice to hear and to see that cybersecurity is taking a larger kind of a seat at the C-suite table, as well as within the entire organization. It's become a real point of conversation. So that is great stuff. So before we close things out, you guys have a new product out, right? Called Cloud Secure, I think it is.
Cloud Secure, yes.
So tell me about it a little bit.
So I think we've actually talked about a few of the reasons why we did it. And what it really does is it allows you to have, in an agentless-based way, allows you to collect data from your public cloud environment, build a map, and help you understand what's happening in those environments, and then allows you to provide zero trust, least privilege kind of recommendations that can be implemented back into the native controls of the environment using infrastructure as code principles, right? So having the big picture, understanding how things are not going to break if you implement, zero trust, even providing those recommendations back to the application owners to sort of infuse that team sport philosophy in your environment, and allows you to sort of do that in the public cloud. And it complements our Illumio core solution, other solutions we've had out there for 8 years, and allows you to have this holistic single pane of glass view across multiple public clouds or public cloud in a traditional on-prem environment.
All right, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, PJ, thank you very much for having the conversation with me about cloud security and zero trust, and telling us a bit about Cloud Secure. So thank you again. I do appreciate your time and obviously your expertise. I appreciate it.
It was a great conversation. I appreciate it as well. Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Charlene has another interview now that I wanted to bring to you, and that is with Alex Bennett, Global Senior VP Workplace and Employee Experience Practice at NTT. They're going to talk about NTT's 2021 Global Workspace Report, dives in, and we'll let Charlene and Alex tell us all about it.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Alex Bennett, who is the Global Senior Vice President for Workplace and Employee Experience Practice at NTT. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So I'm interested in speaking with you a little bit about the survey that you recently put out, the Global 2021 Global Workplace Report. But before we get into the results of that, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about NTT and where you guys kind of fit into the whole IT conversation.
Yeah, so NTT is a global organization. It's a $100 billion organization, headquartered out of Japan. I actually work within NTT Limited. We're really driving the international expansion of NTT, and we focus on really a managed platform and driving this network fabric, and also this view of how do we drive outcomes such as employee experience and customer experience. So that's across 60 countries across the world, and we've got around about 50,000 employees. So do a lot into R&D, a lot into areas with governments about social change, but hopefully impacting a positive change for employees around the world.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about this Global Workplace Report. Is this the first year that you guys have done this report?
No, we actually did one last year, just after the pandemic sort of came in. So it's been really interesting to look at the variances between last year. And we've also taken some data from our customer experience benchmarking report and the voice of the employee data. So as you look at the report, we've really brought a lot of that data together. In terms of where the core research came from, it was about 1,100 people we spoke to from all different countries, 14 different industry sectors, and all different industry areas or personas. So chief HR officer, CEO, operations, right across the board, and around 40% of them were CXO level. So it's given us quite an interesting dynamic and some interesting data points between what the employee's view is and what the executive's view is.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to kind of dig into. So let's do that. Let's talk about some of the high points of the report, especially since you do have 2 years of data to compare against, and I am assuming that since the first one came out right after the pandemic started, that the majority of that data had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was kind of all pre-pandemic workplace. Am I right?
It actually did start to take some of the insights, and it was very much around the business continuity aspects of how technology was going to enable that first view of how do we just keep our businesses going? How do we connect our people? The way of what's the impact of security? This year has very much been, well, actually, what is the new way of working, and how do we get employee experience? But how does technology, I suppose, fundamentally underpin the way people will work going forward? So it's been really interesting, and I think there's probably we broke it down into 3 areas, thinking of work, which is really not a destination anymore. It's a digitization of which a physical location or a workspace can be part of. And then the workforce, because as I think we've started to progress now, the market has become more attuned to the employee, and the employee is starting to have a bigger impact on what organizations are doing around attraction, retention of talent, because they want to have a better work-life balance. And to do that, there's geographical location, but also technology is enabling them now to actually have that view of what they do, when do they do it, as long as they actually get an outcome based to deliver for their role.
Very cool. So let's talk about some of the major findings that came from this report. What are some of the things that really surprised you guys, and what are the things that maybe bolstered what you had already thought about a particular topic?
I think the main one was the difference in the view of workplace strategy between the organization, and especially the executive team, those of the people in operations then deploying, and then actually the employee. So one of the stark sort of areas was we had how visible or how possible is it around executing on your workplace strategy? And CEOs said 72% of them said, we've got a strategy, we're executing on this new way of working, hybrid working's fine, we're off and running. And then operations came back and said only 47% of them felt as though they could actually execute. So the whole area of technical debt, complexity of how you think about automating, integrating new cloud-based tools, security has really caused a lot of, I think, concern in how people are actually deploying that. And then from an employee standpoint, only 23% of them felt as though they actually had the tools to carry out what they needed. So you can see huge discrepancies between what is the strategy and what's the perception versus actually the feedback.
Right. Those are really interesting findings, especially when you consider the number of organizations that really kind of dug deep and kicked off or accelerated their digital transformation efforts as a direct result of the fact that their employees had to work remotely, and their customers now had to reach them in a completely different level, if you will, or a completely different format. So do you think then that the C-suite or those C-level executives are they just kind of clueless? I mean, at the end of the day, if they think that things are humming along, and then operations is saying, not so fast, and then the employees are saying, no, it's not. So is it a lack of communication? Is it just blinders? Where's the disconnect? How is the disconnect happening, I should say?
I think there's so many different areas, and I think it's just the complexity. I mean, we talk a lot about hybrid work, and then you think, well, here's hybrid work, it's a block, and it's not. It's so different from different countries, different cultures, and the way and the different personas that you have in the way that you carry out work. So everyone has a different view of, yes, I might have been given a great team collaboration platform, but actually, how do I use it? Have I been trained? Am I adopted into it? And how am I communicating to carry out my role? And again, that changes from different cultures and environments. I also think that a lot of the executives have signed off the first budget and they just think that that's going to occur now. And I don't think they've necessarily thought about the amount of time that it takes and the complexity of how systems and even the basics of networks, if you think about just where we are with connecting people who may be remote sometime, or they're coming back into the office and they're used to having great video communication at home the whole time. So everyone starts to come back into the office and they're going, I'm going to go and use our video conferencing and connect with my colleagues. And actually the LAN capacity hasn't been increased. So they will automatically have a bad experience. And then also, as more people have moved to cloud, just the view of how the core networks around SD-WAN is starting to make sure you get those aspects actually moving now in the right way. So we've sort of looked at all these areas of technology and said, right, you have to have a holistic view across the board. And as you do that, security has to be embedded all the way through that, so people start to think more about identity-based security or zero trust and perimeter. So all of these components, operations teams have had to say, right, we've got to go through all of this change and do it for all of our people in all of these different places, all with a different view of what hybrid working means. And it just doesn't happen overnight. So I think there is a lag in then employees saying, I know they're making a commitment, but I'm not yet seeing the final resolve of how it's delivered.
Interesting. So are there particular areas, regions, countries that are doing it better than others?
Well, the data would say the US is doing this very well, but also I think sometimes culturally the American culture is that they're always quite optimistic, and in certain other cultures, if you look at certain areas in Europe, they're always a little bit harder. So you look at net promoter scores, you've always got to take some of the variances around culture in as well. But the Americas are showing this as being quite strong, but it's also cultural aspects as well. And obviously coming from a Japanese headquartered organization, people are used to going into an office all the time. It's part of the history. You come into the office prior to your manager and you leave afterwards. So even giving someone a new tool and saying you're now going to collaborate, it doesn't necessarily mean as though they feel connected or that they feel assured that they're belonging to that company and are being seen to help their own personal employment and their career progression as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was wondering earlier whether some of the employee issues regarding whether they feel like their needs are being met, I wonder if that has more to, or at least some to do with how they enjoy communicating or collaborating with their peers, with other employees. If they're not the kind who particularly enjoy being on a Zoom call or another type of collaboration technology, they may not feel like they're getting the real experience. They prefer face-to-face human interaction. They may never feel as though they are getting what they need out of their job, out of their technologies, if they can actually interface with folks in the way that they want to. So that actually is a very, very good point. And, we keep talking about the fact that we have, these hybrid work environments these days. And some people are saying it's a good thing. Some people are saying it's a bad thing, but I don't think we're thinking about employees who really derive the most value out of being in an office and among other people and have that face-to-face communication. We just kind of tend to focus on the folks who are saying, I love remote work. I never want to go back into an office, and we need to create technologies and workflows that accommodate that mode of working. Yeah. And I think it's a much more difficult conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we love as humans to try and put a box around something. Oh, this is a new way of working, and hybrid. That sounds like a cool thing to say. We'll call it hybrid. And when we asked into the question, the organizations came back and said, hey, I think it was 61% of organizations felt that their employees wanted to be full-time back in the office. And that's where they felt, things are perfect. And just the reality is personality traits are never going to allow that to be such a big figure. And actually, when we looked at the voice of the employee, 38% of people said actually they really like being in office and they like the communication, the social camaraderie. 30% also just wanted to be remote the whole time. And they actually really preferred that and have enjoyed it. And another 30% said, yeah, I like being a bit in between. I think where we've got to move to is about flexibility. So hybrid is a brand more than it's actually about how do you provide a level of flexibility to give these individuals a way of which they like to work, because we don't live in an 8 to 5 workplace anymore. As much as we want to try and drive that, and certain individuals like working in the morning, certain individuals like working in the afternoon, and even physiologically we work better sometimes of different days. So I've been working with a lot of chief HR officers around how do you think about this, not just from an employee type or a role function, but also personality traits and how do they sort of mix together. Because you try and drive a policy such as hybrid work globally, it is almost impossible. I mean, we see this as NTT across all these people. How could you say you will all come into the office 4 days a week or 3 days a week? Because there's governance, there's regulatory differences. I think organizations are starting to move to guidance. If we can guide you, and then communities start to create what their rules are based around how they best interact together with those subject matter experts. And that's where technology comes in. If you can give someone a platform to allow communities and small communities to self-regulate, but allow them to get their tasks done, then they define their work-life balance. Then they can actually go, yeah, I love being with my kids in the morning, but I'm going to finish that later today, and I'll governance that with my own team. But the executive team need to culturally allow for that to happen.
I agree 100%. And I also recognize that there are certain things that unfortunately do kind of go by a timetable. You have to have certain things done by a particular time. But I will say anecdotally, the best jobs I've ever had were bosses who said, I don't care when you work, just as long as the work gets done. And then if I need to get in touch with you, I can. And I think we're kind of getting to the point where business leaders now recognize that their employees are happiest when you give them the freedom to be able to live a life in addition to get their work done. And those folks who they said introverts unite. I've been just waiting for this day when I don't have to go back into the office and I'll just get all my work done from home, and I'm happiest now. Those are the folks who personality-wise, those are the ones who never really want to go back into the office, and they're the ones who were the happiest in their work environment during the pandemic. And it's been really, really interesting to see how personality is now playing a much larger role in deciding how employees want to work today and moving forward. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Understanding the employee not just from what they're able to do, but how they're able to do it the best, and give them that freedom. I think is most important. So interesting stuff.
And then I think it also comes back to, a lot of the conversations I'm having with clients is you also need to show data, so science-based and data-based impact, because if you do have, perhaps an executive who is more traditional in a hierarchical way, and we saw with many organizations like Goldman Sachs, we want you to be in the office. That's the way we run our business. Mm-hmm. And then you had individuals saying, do I want to do that anymore? Why don't I go and work for Morgan Stanley, and that's because of the talent pool crisis we're starting to move into. I think we're starting to get more areas of interest in that area. But it comes back down to, I think it's the tools and the way in which communities interact together will allow people to feel a sense of belonging. If they have a sense of belonging, they then tend to carry out their best work, as you said. But if you don't have data to back it up, that you've still got good productivity, you've still got an ability to hit your targets, innovation is occurring, then you can justify it. And that comes into the whole area of trust and trustworthiness. Are you using that data in the right way? GDPR, are you Big Brother? And that's to you what you said at the start, communication. Communicate why you've done that. Normalize the data if you need to, so it isn't at a personal level, but really show nudge technology about sentiment and why it's improving.
Interesting stuff. So if folks want to take a look at the survey, is it freely available?
Yeah, so it is launched on Tuesday, the 9th of November on the entity website. We'll be distributing that onto our digital channels as well, and they'll be free to download it. We've also got our own portal. So for the clients that we do engage with, they can actually interact with us, go in and any of the questions, they can start to benchmark their own net promoter scores or any of the components by the industry sector, region, country. And it's really interesting as you look at the dynamics from this year to next year, and they look at where they are with their peers. It's a great form of data to have a discussion on.
Awesome. Great. Well, Alex, thank you so much for having the conversation with me about the survey. It sounds like a fascinating study, and I do believe that organizations will derive a lot of value from it. So thanks for having the conversation with me. And we'll put up a link on the site to access the report as well. So just a little extra there for you. But
Thank you very
thanks
much
again for having the conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more Techstrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Next up, we're going to go to the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitch has two videos today. The first one that I'm going to bring to you right now is with Stacy English and Theta Lake, Director of Market Intelligence. And they're going to share the results of a report showing the usage of modern communications and video tools such as Teams, WebEx, and Zoom. How much it's accelerated and how quickly it is accelerating and not slowing down. Here now is Mitchell.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, the pleasure of being joined by Stacy English, who is with Theta Lake. Stacy is Director of Market Intelligence and has a lot of background in this topic, so I'm anxious to talk with you, Stacy. So welcome.
Thank you, Mitch. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about you, and of course, give us a little bit of an overview on Theta Lake.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Stacey English. I've been in financial services regulation for 25 years. So I've been a former regulator and a practitioner in banks and insurers. So I very much speak as someone who's been in the shoes of our customers at Theta Lake. So at Theta Lake, we provide security and compliance for collaboration platforms. So the platforms that we are so dependent on now to work, so like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and WebEx. And we enable firms to detect any risks across anything that's spoken, shared, typed or shown in those environments, and also to archive it, to capture and retain all of those new communications that we're using, either capture it and archive it with us, or alternatively, use existing tools and providers and send it there. So prior to joining Theta Lake, I was with Thomson Reuters. I headed up their regulatory intelligence team. So I was providing news and insight and industry research to financial services firms right across the world. And that's a very big part of my role now at Theta Lake, making sure we've got the regulatory insight and the market insight so that our products and our content really helps customers with their compliance and security.
And we know that's a changing landscape, just like remote work and, the tools that we've been using. Well, to that point, I've had other conversations with folks from Theta Lake, and, it's an interesting market given the rise in, rampant use, great increases in digital communications collaboration, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, you name it. We're using all kinds of tools to do collaboration. I know you just came out with a new version or a recent update to some research that you've done. I believe the prior version was done prior to the pandemic, February 2020. So I'm curious, maybe tell us a little bit about what that research was, what you're looking to learn, maybe what some of the new insights are.
Absolutely. So the research started in 2018, so way before the pandemic, and already that transformation was starting to happen with the move to collaboration tools. And of course, the pandemic has absolutely accelerated that. So the latest results show a very different picture. This took place in the second quarter of this year. 100 technology practitioners within financial services firms took part. So some really good insight to understand how they're using these tools and where their pain points are and what they see as the challenges. So we asked lots of questions and got some validated some things that we were seeing and hearing from customers, and also some surprises. So I think the biggest thing that we've seen is just how dependent we are on these tools. So 91% of firms have multiple systems, so not just one collaboration tool. They're using 2+, and actually 2/3 are using between 4 and 6. So they have multiple tools in place, and that's because of different geographies and business units and using them in different ways. So of course, firms have had to roll out these platforms so they can actually stay productive and connected in this new environment. But it really had to do that without thinking of some of the consequences around the regulatory aspects and security aspects. The focus has been on making sure we can actually continue with our businesses. So that is a challenge, because the tools that they have in place to actually protect these communications aren't necessarily built for the way we communicate today. So they have lots of controls around email, that sort of thing. But when you're talking about video and chat and screen share, it's a different type of control that's required. So a big dependency on them. And also, when you think about having multiple tools in place, for example, it's quite difficult to see across those tools. So just one example, like an information barrier, you might want to use some built-in controls that stop different groups within an organization talking and sharing confidential information. But when you have access to multiple tools, it's very, very difficult to do that across platforms. So that's why, as I say, we take that macro view. So it doesn't matter what tool you're using, actually, it can detect if this team is talking to this team or this individual is talking to this individual. So it's a really important, different way of looking at controls. So lots of tools in place, and the way we're communicating is so different now. So whereas we would have a spider phone in a room, or a print out documents or email, we really are using video and chat much more. And the results show that since last year, the use of video is up 70%, and the use of chat is up 50%. And as we've said, it's a different way. There's visual risks in that. Chat is very different to email. So that's
if I can jump in, one of the things that I've also seen, and I'm curious if it's borne out in your data. Two things. One, we have a lot of activities happening all at once, like there's mergers and acquisitions, and those bring different tools just in and of themselves, and organizations don't suddenly sweep everybody onto whatever the corporate standard is. Oftentimes you live with that kind of mixed environment. The other is, in the digital world, we have less a physical environment that dictates the kind of conversations that we have. Like organizations might have an office location where they have private conversations with HR, or an executive war room, executive meeting room. Well, that could all happen on Zoom, or on a Slack call, or on Google Meet, or whatever, Microsoft Team. And so the same tool is used from anything from a casual conversation to, let's talk about this company we're acquiring next week, and we need to get the announcement ready and get our regulatory ducks in a row. So it can get really confusing, because you're using the same medium for every level of privacy communications.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a couple of things there. One is it actually increases the risks, because what would have happened in a closed room can actually be now recorded. I could have a camera in the background. I could be taking a screenshot. Mm-hmm. So there is that extra layer of security required. And also regulators expect the same robustness of controls. So it doesn't matter to them whether you're in an office or dealing with customers through a screen. They expect the same levels of supervision and the same levels of monitoring and protection of data. So organizations do have to contend with that. We're aware of those different types of communications, and one of the features we have within the platform is the ability to route different communication types to different teams. So, for example, you may have some sort of general customer service queries, and they would be routed to a different team for review or detection, but something very confidential may need to be kept very, very tight. So, like you say, if there was something, a detection that came up in an executive level meeting, that could be specifically routed via a workflow so that only very closed eyeballs were on that. Mm-hmm. But it is an important distinction to have that, not treat all communications in the same way.
I've been in meetings where it was a requirement to have counsel present, and I'm not in terms of a deposition kind of thing. Of course, those are other things too, but just given the topic that you're having, to sort of make sure you stay on track and don't step outside of any bounds. So there's really a lot of sensitivity around what seems like just let's hop on Zoom, let's hop on Team and talk about whatever. But yeah, what we're talking about makes a lot of difference. What we should say and who should have access to that information.
Yeah, but it's a transformation, I said, that was happening anyway. Having been in global organizations, it's not just the remote working. Those conversations have to take place across time zones, different countries. So it's the good thing is we now know that those tools are different, and there are the controls available, thankfully, to actually manage them in a way that protects the different groups of individuals, so that it's not open for everybody to see.
You mentioned surprises. What were maybe a few surprises, things you didn't expect to see in your research?
Well, actually, I think the biggest concern for us, it was something that we're hearing, but to actually see it kind of in the responses, was that 83% of customers are actually, customers and the industry is not leveraging all the capabilities of the platforms that they have invested in. So they have rolled out these really helpful platforms, but they haven't been able to use all the features because of those concerns around security and compliance. So they're actually switching some of the features off. And of course, their users want to use, they want to use chat, they want to use video, customers want to engage and use them, but they're concerned about controlling it. So the default position has been, let's just switch it off. And that's not really a sustainable position to be in when you have invested and you have your workforce wanting to use them. And what a waste of an investment. So that's a surprise so high to be 83% disabling that. But there are we're purpose built for these type of tools. So you can actually turn on chat knowing that it can be, if you wanted selective archive, for example, you didn't want to record your video, but you wanted to record and keep a record of the messages I'm sending to you in this video meeting now, you can do that. So the technology is there, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually manage these new communication types. But that's certainly a big challenge that obviously organizations are facing, having to turn them off. In terms of where they saw the biggest risks, that was in chat. I mean, quite consistently, 2/3 were saying that it's the links and the files that they are receiving in chat that causes the most concern around privacy and security, quite consistently. So, we know chat is a very different type of communication. It's by its very nature, it's very shareable. You can attach pretty much anything to it. There's no limitations on size. You can add in confidential data. You can attach files and links, and that's the concern. And once it's on that chat message conversation, it's there in your system for good until you remediate it. So it's an understandable concern that firms have.
And chat tends to be less formal, so it's not like putting something in writing in a document or a memo or something. Is this driving the need for new forms of discovery kind of tools? For when organizations have to meet complaints on something, or maybe they have to provide evidence with a party to a lawsuit or something like that. Because now you're talking about all of these electronic platforms where communication is happening and information is shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very important part, the discovery part, the ability to capture those records and, to retain them, pull that when you need to, whether that's for an investigation or a complaint or for a regulator or for your internal audit teams. So, yes, I mean, they are informal, and the way that our home and work environment is blurring so that our conduct can change. And the fact that you can attach GIFs and you can change the meaning with all sorts of emojis, and you can like things and dislike things and angry faces and winking faces. And that's really hard to capture. And you need that because you need to understand what was it in context. Added to that, it's very, very hard to recreate a chat conversation. So if your tools are built for email, each chat is not an email. So to try and stitch that all together to say, okay, well, across time zones with multiple people involved and a chat that went on for years and years and years and had GIFs and images attached. Very, very, very difficult. So thankfully at Theta Lake, the team have been clever enough to actually stitch that together and build an interface that shows that chat as if it was the original chat. So it's very, very easy for, for legal purposes or whatever, to actually review what happened in context.
I'm curious, how since you've been a regulator also in your career, oftentimes regulation and sort of the movement of the market technology, et cetera, regulation tends to be farther behind. Now, I think we're living in an environment where privacy and things like that, some regulation, GDPR, et cetera, have gotten ahead and kind of forced companies to react. How is the regulatory side doing in keeping up with the changes of the last 18 months and how we do business? Are they prepared to kind of rethink of a fully digital environment versus traditional pen and paper and printing things out and documents signed in person, all those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, over the last few weeks, we have seen such a flurry of announcements and clarification from regulators, because they are aware this is the way we work now. And I said they expect the controls to be as robust. So there's an awful lot of clarification coming out to make sure those risks in a remote environment are managed. And ESMA, one of the European regulators, actually specified and said, look, electronic communications covers video conferencing, instant messaging, any sort of business interaction. And actually, we're not going to give you a list of what it covers, because technology moves so fast that list is going to be out of date. And I think that's a real acknowledgement that it's almost like a slightly common sense approach. If it's an electronic communication, it's covered. And if you're working at home, then the controls have to be the same. So I think whilst, yes, it does take longer for the actual precise detail of rules to catch up, there is an expectation that don't rely on every word of the rule. We are expecting you to supervise in the same way. We're expected to be able to ask you for records. And if you can't produce those records, obviously, then there's an issue. So, yes, certainly we've seen such a lot of focus from regulators in every continent.
Excellent. So at Theta Lake, do you primarily focus on the finance industry? Do you work in other industries as well?
We work across all industries. This particular survey, we focused on financial services because we had such a huge response. And I think that's because of the environment and the regulatory environment, it made sense to pull out the most complete 100 responses so that peers could benchmark themselves. But yes, healthcare, education, it tends to be the most regulated industries, and that includes government. Mm-hmm. Anywhere where you need to reproduce records or demonstrate that you've complied with industry codes, or where you have customers who might request data or data deletion or make complaints.
Very good. Well, fascinating research, very timely, of course, with all that's happening. Where can folks find out more about Theta Lake, Stacey?
Well, we have a website which tells you all about what we do. The survey can be downloaded there too. Of course, we are on LinkedIn and Twitter, so please do follow us there. And we keep those very up to date with all of our developments.
Great.
I'm very happy to connect personally.
Well, definitely check that out. Stacey English, who is Director of Market Intelligence with Theta Lake. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Our last interview for the day is, again, an Analyst Corner interview with Mitch. And in this one, Mitchell interviews Kevin Knowlton, Director of Academic Outreach at DHS-funded CyberOrg, about a recent learning standards that was released and for K-12. And Mitchell will talk to Kevin all about it. Here now is Mitchell Ashley.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, the pleasure of being joined by Kevin Knowlton. Kevin is Director of Academic Outreach with a new organization called Cyber.org. We're going to get into that. Welcome. Good to be talking with you, Kevin.
Mitch, I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to be with you and appreciate you expressing great interest in the subject we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. It's very topical. We're having a lot of conversation about this. We'll get into that. Rather than have you give an overview of cyber.org, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll talk about cyber.org.
Definitely. So I am what I like to call as a recovering educator. So I'm a former classroom teacher, a former assistant principal of a K-8 school in northern Louisiana. And then I joined cyber.org in 2014 to help further cybersecurity education. So my background being education, my passion being ensuring that we are really focusing on K-12 as the key to ensuring that we have a cyber literate workforce for the future.
Excellent. So now the August 4th was a big announcement for you. Was that the official launch of cyber.org, or were you doing some things before that, before you kind of take this next step?
So cyber.org, actually, we got our start back in 2011, focusing on workforce development. And what we did was took an approach that is very, very unique, and an approach that has proven to yield many, many dividends with regards to workforce development. We start our education programs, our workforce programs in the K-12 level in hopes that we introduce students to the jobs of tomorrow, the jobs that are necessary today, and the jobs that are available in the future. So we started in 2011. We've been working under a federal grant from the Department of Homeland Security and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Securities Agency since 2012. And August 4th, we launched our first ever, the nation's first K-12 cybersecurity standards.
Okay, standards for K-12. Okay, tell me a little bit about that. We'll get into this recent announcement.
Right. So many of us know that K-12 education is very rigorous in that we have to hit certain benchmarks within the classroom and core subject areas, whether that's math, science, English language arts. But recently, we have seen as a society a focus being made on career and technical education, technical skills that are important for graduates of high school to have going into careers, going into a 2-year degree program or a 4-year degree program. The void that we see now is a lack of cybersecurity standards. There are computer science standards, and those are important. And our friends at code.org and CSTA have done an incredible job with those standards. But what we need in our country, in our society, is a cyber literate workforce. And so being able to create this first ever national set of K-12 cybersecurity standards is going to provide teachers, school districts, and states with a guide to what to teach at different grade levels to ensure that we are introducing our students to cybersecurity concepts, the ethics behind live, working, and playing in cyberspace safely, as well as introducing them to career opportunities that exist in cybersecurity.
And where were you when my kids were going through K through 12? That's going back a little ways anyway. So, and it sounds like, so you're really talking about sort of an evolving fundamental set of education that students are getting, building upon where they are in their life, in their schooling. That is at least standardized or put it together in a way that you have a consistent base that kids going through school are getting those kind of fundamental concepts and building upon that.
Absolutely, Mitch. One of the analogies that I love to draw is that your listeners are probably very, very familiar with the NICE Workforce Framework. And the goal of the NICE Workforce Framework is to ensure that there is a consistency in job roles, job duties, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks within each job role, and the need for level setting all industries on what those specific job roles entail. If we look at the K-12, we want to ensure that students who are graduating high school, no matter what state they're in, have a baseline of knowledge that they can then pursue a degree program across the country or a career across the country. One of the old jokes that I use, and I use it as a joke, but I'm dead serious when I say it, is once you've seen one state Department of Education, you've seen one state Department of Education. And so the ability for us as educators to have a common baseline of what to teach as it relates to cybersecurity will remove barriers, will remove an unknown that many educators have with regards to cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. It's all about the curriculum, right?
Right. It's all about the curriculum, and it's more so, about giving teachers the confidence to have conversations around cybersecurity, as well as giving them the tools, i.e., the curriculum, to support that confidence.
It's really easy to feel out of your depths, even for a cybersecurity professional. So I can imagine a teacher, having some solid resources to teach those concepts. So on the 4th of August, you had a big announcement. Tell us about some other things you're doing with the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah. So with the regards to the standards, we've had an incredible announcement that we made with the launch of the standards, but this just furthers our impact across the country. And it is a call to action, ultimately, because when we look at it from the perspective of industry and government, what is industry doing to support educators in educating the next generation cyber literate workforce? And Mitch, I don't have to tell your audience that our workforce gaps today are tremendous. When that number gets upwards of 500,000, and that number is going to just increase, like a hockey stick, upward over the next course of the next couple of years, we have to ensure that our students, our next generation workforce, are really provided with these resources. And you think about the forests that we go hiking in. Those trees were not planted yesterday. Those trees were planted 100 years ago by visionaries, by individuals, by Mother Nature in some cases. But it's a long-term investment, and that's what my call to action to industry is what are you doing to place those seeds in these forests to ensure that we have a cyber literate workforce for years to come? In my opinion, the greatest threat to national security is the lack of K-12 resources going into our school systems. If we do not begin investing now, that we are not going to have a workforce that's going to protect against the malware and the ransomware attacks that are happening on a daily basis in our country.
Yeah, there's no way you can meet the job demand with, let's go to colleges and start teaching people now. It's like it's still too late.
Way too late.
One of the things that we were talking a lot about this on several segments, CISO Talk and some other videos, and it's all about developing the workforce of the future. And one of the big issues is people are just not aware. Especially when you get into people of color, diversity for men and women. There's a lack of resource, just a lack of knowing what are some of the possibilities. Now you see surveys to say, secure cybersecurity is one of the highest paying fields to get into, or, with a lot of growth into it, might attract a few people, but just, how do you might be interested in it more or less? Just want to make some money at it. And it sounds like that's part of your purpose as well, really just telling people, educating them, giving them some knowledge and information, but letting them know what it's about.
The story I love to share is when I was in the classroom, and I would always ask my students, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I got doctor, lawyer, veterinarian, police officer, fighter pilot. I got all those answers, but one student one day in class raised his hand and said, Mr. Knowlton, how can you expect me to tell you what I want to be when I grow up when I don't know what all the options are? And that was the aha moment for me as an educator to think about, what am I doing to ensuring that my students know what those options are? what am I doing to focus on, providing my students with opportunities of tomorrow to plant those seeds that I mentioned earlier? And in most cases, that scenario plays out in classrooms across the country. And what are we doing to ensuring that educator has the confidence and the awareness to have and engage a dialogue with that student? There are cybersecurity deserts all across the country. And if you were to look at a heat map of where our cybersecurity, major cybersecurity companies are, they're going to be on the coasts. And you see this Midwest, the South region where that is a cybersecurity desert. And where there is a lack of industry, there is also a lack of academic programs focused on cybersecurity. So I think, from an industry perspective, every industry, whether you're in agriculture, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in small business, whether you're the owner of the flower shop on the corner of 3rd and Main Street, cybersecurity is important to you, and the outreach that you have and the impact that you could have to students is also equally important to ensuring that we're closing that workforce gap.
And nothing's made that more obvious than just the proliferation of ransomware, for example. I think you have a really awesome site in cyber.org, obviously. One of the things I really liked about it was, of course, you have professional development resources for teachers and things that you talked about there. There's also a career exploration section, which I thought it does a really nice visual and descriptive or description of, what is a cyber forensic expert? What could you make of that? What's the job growth look like? What kind of a degree do you have to have? There's a lot. I know a number of people have said, "Why didn't you go into cyber?" Because I thought you had to be really good at math. You had to do encryption. Like, the number of people who need to do that are extremely small. There's so many dimensions, whether it's governance and compliance, or it's, being down at the protocol level, or it's cloud security, it's application security. It could be, there's so many possibilities. And I thought you did a nice job of describing some of those.
Definitely. Career awareness, again, workforce development being our core priority. Career awareness is that key that we can use to ensuring that students know what they want to be when they grow up. And those career profile cards that are on our website, cyber.org, really have seen a tremendous success in rural communities, in those low socioeconomic communities, because what we showcase is what degree is required, if any, right? So that cybercrime investigator, if you look on the back of it, it says that a degree is not required. So you could graduate high school, go into this workforce making $67,000 a year. Think about that. A high school graduate making $67,000 a year. That's oftentimes more money than their parents make combined at the peak of their jobs or peak of their careers. So the ability to introduce these students to these career fields, these job opportunities, and to provide them a pathway for pursuing that. What does it take to get an internship in this career field? What does it take to get an entry-level position? These are all questions that we have to address when we have low socioeconomic, populations of our country that do not have availability to many resources. And traditionally, cybersecurity has been a high cost to entry because you need access to devices, hardware, you need software. Cyber.org, through our federal grant, wants to ensure that every teacher, every school has access to resources. And that's why we provide everything at no cost. And that's FREE. And I always say that's my teacher's favorite 4-letter F word, is free. And so our ability to provide these career awareness resources to these students in these rural communities, these low socioeconomic regions, that's where we're starting to see tremendous work. And 71% of our engagement over the last year has been in Title I schools. Those are schools that are in low income areas.
Excellent. We could have a whole nother segment on diversity. I think one of the aspects of it, and you're talking about the socioeconomic differences of where you live or the family that you come from, all of those kind of things. I think one of the things we've really suffered from is too many folks from the same background, the same kind of position in society or family, or whether it's, wealth or what level of wealth. And by having a very strong diversity of people from very different backgrounds, can be international, can be local, can be, I come from a family who's well-educated, I come from a family who maybe I'm the first to kind of take that next step. But having, my folks run a corner store, my folks, who run a warehouse or whatever it might be, all of those backgrounds are extremely valuable because those are different environments, different settings, same but different security issues, and you can bring different ideas and innovations to that. But the problem is we have to secure all of that. So it's not just about securing websites.
Right. It's not just about securing websites, and take a look at the Colonial Pipeline hack. Take a look at, you name it, right? I'm not just picking on one, but I'm going to pick on all of them. You name and take a look at this. And are these industries predominantly cybersecurity industries? They're not. They're critical infrastructure industries. They are industries that have a pivotal role in our nation's economy. So if you want to go be a doctor, cybersecurity you're not immune to the need of cybersecurity. You have to have an awareness. And that's where cyber.org's goal is. And my goal for our staff is that every student cyber literate. That's our goal, no matter what career they're going into.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, you answered one question I had, which is, think about 2 or 3 or maybe more years down the road, what would the landscape look like if you're highly successful? You're talking about kind of everybody being cyber literate and have that sort of baseline of information. Is there other goals and aspirations that you have?
I think that I love sharing these stats, the stats that 23,000 educators in all 50 states, 4 U.S. territories, are using our content curriculum. 3 million students have been beneficiaries of our resource. But when I look at the denominator and I say that there's 52 million students in the country, and my goal is to have a saturation of 1 million teachers utilizing our content and curriculum, our work here has just begun. And so I think our call to action is that it is important that private industry and the federal government partner together in a public-private partnership through programs like ours to really provide resources and be regional champions of cybersecurity education in their communities. And this is how we begin moving the needle, right? And look at STEM, right? When we look at STEM, and Kevin's opinion here is that our workforce gap today, not just in cybersecurity, but in broad STEM fields, our workforce gap today is directly caused by our lack of attention to STEM education 15, 20 years ago. And so we have to address the pipeline issue here. And so this is today the opportunity we have to start increasing that numerator and get 1 million teachers, to get 52 million students impacted through cybersecurity programs, so that we're not in a world of hurt 15, 20 years from now.
So in entrepreneur speak, there's a lot of market share to be gained yet for you. So where can folks find out about this? How do educators find out about it? Do they get an email from a friend? Do they get, is there a program to communicate this? How do people find out about it?
That's a great question, Mitch. If you're an educator, if you're a K-12 educator, or if you're listening to this podcast and know a K-12 educator, tell them to go check out cyber.org. Log on to cyber.org, create your account, and you have free access to all curriculum, elementary, middle, high school level curriculum. But if you are an industry, reach out to cyber.org through our website and contact us, and let's have a conversation on what we can do to impact your community and to create a cyber literate ecosystem that in the long run is going to benefit you as an industry from a talent pool that will feed into your organization that will be cyber literate.
Excellent. So check it out, cyber.org. Great website. It's very well designed. It's got a lot of great information on it. I can see why you're having success. So, well, Kevin Knowlton, great to be talking with you. Kevin is Director of Academic Outreach with cyber.org, if you couldn't tell. And thanks for being with us today.
Mitch, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm grateful for the audience to be listening and to taking up the cause of ensuring that we have a cyber literate population moving forward.
Very good. Thank you.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right. That's going to put a wrap for today, Thursday, 12/2. As usual, we will be repeating a best of tomorrow on Friday. We'll be back here Monday with some great new content. That'll be on December 6th. Until then, everyone, be well, be strong, be Techstrong.